Blur first?
Nah.
Okay. Well,
Here's my room.
well, it's good to see you again. I know it's only been a week, but I missed you, bud.
You're as beautiful as ever.
Yeah,
You're as, you retired, kind of.
working on the scruff, you know what I'm saying?
Work. You'll get there. It's okay, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
Um,
dude, I just started. It's been
if
3
it's anything
days.
like your luscious head of hair, I'm sure we'll get a mean little scruff here.
Oof, yeah. So what are you drinking, by the way, as you take a sip of that?
So this is actually, I'm gonna show it to the viewers. Something that me and my mother have found. It is a Crown Royal blackberry whiskey sour.
Okay.
But I'm only gonna
Okay.
drink one of them and then switch to makers.
So it's funny you bring that up. I'm actually going to stand up and walk away from you for a second because
Ooh.
this is something you can't hear me right now, can you?
I can kind of hear you. Come on.
All
You
right,
can do it,
so
buddy.
there we go. This remains on my top shelf. This is a Weller's 12-year. This is a $200 bottle of wheated bourbon. My buddy Quinn got me this because this bottle is his namesake, and he wanted to get me a good bottle of bourbon for retirement. So I only sip out of this every once in a while. Next time you're down, me and you're gonna have a small glass. I make baby glasses of it just to
Oh, yeah. No, you got to
it,
appreciate it.
yep. So I'll start with that, and then I'm probably gonna move to Blanton's because oh, that's what I didn't do. Hold on.
For anyone who's listened to the first podcast, I give it until the end of the revolution before, you know, we get kind of crazy. I don't know. I don't know. It depends on
Who'd
what
this come
bottle he
from?
brings over.
Who'd this
Oh,
come from?
some good looking dude, I bet.
Oh yeah, some good looking dude got me a decanter that has one of my famous quotes on it. Be a good dude, stay lucky, and
Stay
our
lucky,
4-week
baby.
clover. Yeah. So
Gotta stay lucky.
we'll move to Blanton's at some point tonight.
Is
But
that
we're
what's in there?
that is I put Blanton's in your decanter.
Damn, I would have thought you would have put Jefferson's in there.
Well, so that bottle that you brought over of Jefferson's, I was saving that because we were
For
going to drink it together, and then you, like a straight
no,
grunt,
go on.
went to sleep in your truck while the rest of us partied till 5 a.m.
I have responsibilities, dude. Had a nice little beautiful breakfast date to get to. So she's pretty great.
I mean,
Can't
that's
can't get
fair.
I mean, she looks exactly like me, so I can't complain too much. And she always gives me high fives and is honestly a little turd most of the time, but she's great.
Oh, dude, that was the other thing I wanted to talk about as we open up this podcast, and I think it's something that we need to consider after this podcast or in between this and the next one. See what we can do to make shirts and see if we can get a glass of history shirt made.
Ooh,
Because
okay.
I would love to wear that on the podcast.
We have to know somebody who knows how to do that. I mean, I know how to do that. I don't have the time to do that right now.
Oh,
So if
I can
somebody
figure it
wants
out.
to
I
take the
have time.
mantle, yeah, I
I
know
have
you do,
time.
you unemployed bastard.
Hey, I'm not fully unemployed. I don't graduate college until October 27th, so technically I'm a student now.
Oh, 16 days, dude.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm already done with my finals, so what's left? Um,
Recording podcasts.
yeah, yeah. Which I enjoy doing with you, so that's the new job, I guess. But before you kind of go into to everything for this episode, I kind of just want to start with because this doesn't really have anything to do. It does have something to do with this podcast, but it's not necessarily within the timeline of what we're about to talk about.
Okay.
I'm going to start with this is a very Geoffrey Chaucer like Canterbury Tales, right?
Okay.
Um, most of our peer group, the older individuals, they would know or they would be able to at least find relevance in this in Heath Ledger's The Night Tale that was made by Heidelberg.
Great movie.
Yep. Which
Great movie.
I love that movie. Still love that movie.
So
So
good.
Geoffrey Chaucer is a famous Middle Ages writer who writes the Canterbury Tales, which inside the Canterbury Tales, it is basically stories about peasants,
Yeah.
the underclass, not the ruling class. And the Middle Ages focuses on religion, in the ruling class.
Yeah, we actually had to read Canterbury Tales in high school.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic, right?
Hated
So,
it at the time. Super appreciative of it now.
yep. This is kind of one of those classic tales of actually no shit changing your stars.
Yeah, I
Right?
can see it.
William Thatcher, change your stars.
I can see it.
You know,
I
I
can
will
find it.
fawn you pain, lots of pain.
Oh shoot.
So
Well, are you ready?
I am after I've dove into medieval humanities.
The first thing about this dude is controversial.
It is.
Alexander Hamilton. He was born in 1755 or 1753.
Nope.
Yeah,
57.
50. It's not 57. It's 53.
I'm pretty sure it's 57. Hold
Oh
on.
dear.
Oh, now we're already starting. We're already checking each other.
See, I told you it's controversial.
Yeah. Oh,
Who
so
was born
I've got it from Emery Spear. Emery Spear
557?
has 57 or 55.
Okay, stand
Now,
corrected.
now with that being said, Matt's not wrong in this observation. The one thing that does stay true is 11 January. That stays true. 11
Yeah,
January stays
no,
true.
for sure.
Yep.
It
That
it
day.
but what year? And now I'm gonna add 53 on there just because.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
I mean,
not?
he had 3 over the hill parties. You
Who'd have
know?
thunk?
Yeah.
But
You would have thought it.
so this and the story behind how that all came to be is super cool, but we're gonna get to that later.
I love it too
So
much.
he was born. Everyone wants me to bring up the musical. I couldn't tell you how many of these people that I met, lovely people, that I met that are just like, well, how accurate is the musical? We will get to that in its entirety, but he wasn't born on some tiny island. He was born on Nevis, which was like the largest British trading post in the Caribbean. So, not a small town,
Yep.
not a deserted island. It wasn't 4 people. It was huge.
And
Um,
that actually kind of plays into the problem, right? Where we look at the 53, 55, 57 as well, because he's actually born out of wedlock to James Hamilton and his mother, Rachel Fawcett. James Hamilton's a Scottish merchant of St. Christopher Island,
mhm.
and his mother has essentially lost everything at this point.
But do you know why he had to be born out of wedlock?
Because John Michael Lavion, however you want to pronounce his name, was Rachel Fawcett's first husband, who they had 5
Still
kids with.
husband, still husband.
Oh, I
Because
thought they were divorced.
no, they couldn't afford a divorce, which is why her and
Oh,
John Hamilton could never get married. Which is why
oh.
Alexander is a bastard.
Yeah. So they couldn't afford a divorce because
Dang Catholics.
Rachel Fawcett actually had a sizable fortune
Yeah.
from her father.
Yep.
John Michael Lavian squanders it all.
Oh yeah, he just gambles it, pisses it in the wind.
Yep. And it gets worse. Oh, it gets worse.
Oh, say it ain't so.
Yep. And I don't know if we want to get into that part yet. But my mind kind of plays into James. James takes off. James Hamilton takes off. Right. It's an embarrassment to his family, things like that. He's got 2 kids out of wedlock now, James Jr. and Alex. And Alex and Rachel come down with some sort of sickness.
They say it's yellow fever, but no one's actually sure. It's not a quick death either.
No.
Another inaccuracy from Alex got better, but his mother went quick. Oh no, it took her like 14 days to die.
Yep.
It was pretty bad.
Yep.
And actually that the whole thing messed Alexander up for life. To the point where like he's got letters with Benjamin Franklin saying like, how do I deal with, my bowel movement problems? And Benjamin Franklin's like, well, you should never drink in excess and limit yourself when you do drink to 3 glasses of wine a day and never 2 days in a row. And just the most Benjamin Franklin-esque answer ever.
Yeah.
But people attribute that to his yellow fever or whatever illness he got when he was
Yeah.
10.
And that's where I kind of say it gets worse because Rachel Fawcett dies as both Alex and her are stricken with yellow fever, right?
Sure.
Rachel's doing okay for herself at this point. She opens up a store,
Mhm.
and James and Alex help her run that store. Rachel dies.
Where does the store go?
In comes the destroyer of worlds who ruined Rachel Fawcett the first time and now will ensure that he does his best to ruin James and Alex upon Rachel Fawcett's death. And walks in John Lavian again. And he
Gotta love him.
ensures, yep, he ensures that all of Rachel Fawcett's belongings go directly to one of the kids that was born to them within their marriage, their communion.
Yep.
So James and Alex are,
Shit out of luck.
yep, they've got nothing. They're left with nothing.
Yep. Yep.
They
And
are they're what we refer to nowadays as a stupid poor.
but wait, it gets worse. So after all of this happens, and Alex and his brother James get pretty much orphaned, they relatively stay together, and they go to, I believe, their aunt. I may be mistaken. I do.
I think it's uncle.
Uncle,
Uncle.
who doesn't know what to do. He eventually dies 30 days later.
Yep.
And he had updated the terrible part about this is he actually updated his will within those 30 days and intentionally left them out of it. So all of his money, what do?
Yep.
It goes to his sons. Now, what do you do with these two kids? And this is where it kind of you can play it back. You can start seeing the mastermind at work. So Alex did kind of teach himself to read, and all of these other things become good with numbers, good with categorizing, good with logging things. So he actually goes and becomes a registrar for a shipping company
Or
per
a
se.
mercantile shipping company. Yep.
Yeah. And his brother actually gets apprenticed out to be a carpenter.
So, and I think that's a hot point to hit on, because most people don't realize that, like, what they see of school nowadays, like where everybody just goes to school, or
Yeah,
you're
it's
truant
normal.
if you're not. Yep. You had to have money to go to school back then, and also what you had to be is you had to be a legitimate child. If you were an illegitimate child or a bastard, you could not go to school. So you would have to pay people to come into your home to teach them, which Rachel Fawcett actually did. She actually did pay some people to come in and help teach Alex and James Jr. But for the most part, Alexander Hamilton is self-taught.
Which is just crazy if you go on to actually the dude wrote. Like, I couldn't tell you, and you know because you've researched this, but this podcast is almost 100% primary sourced.
Yep.
And that's a good thing and a bad thing. But but I do have a lot of secondary sources, mainly the book that the musical was based on, Ron Kershaw's
Chernow, right? Right?
Chernow.
Yep.
I'm
It's
terrible
Chernow.
with names if it's not right in front of me. Um,
Matt started drinking at 3, by the way. It's now 3 hours later.
hey, no. No, so I use that quite a bit to back up some of these primary documents because I mean we'll reference Alexander says, and
Yep.
then it'll go some boisterous bullshit. So, but this stage of his life, it really goes to show you that he has been seen. He's been shown to excel educationally. Um, he has an inquisitive mind, and he always wants to get just like a little bit better. He's like the super competitive, like I want to be the best at every single thing I do. Very marine mindset,
100%.
in my opinion.
And it's funny because at this time, and this is again, we're going to keep diving into some of these primary sources, but this is a letter to his friend Edward Stevens. And this is at a young age. This is like 13 years old. And he writes to his friend Edward Stevens. And first off, the letter in and of itself, you can go online and see all these Library of Congress, all that you can see all these letters. But he shows early aspirations, and he shows a direct quote is willing to risk my life, though not my character, to exalt my station, which is honestly a bit of foreshadowing.
A lot of bit of foreshadowing.
Yep. However, that is a direct quote from a letter that he wrote to one of his friends, Edward Stevens, while he was still on St. Croix. Because
Yeah,
I think his uncle was on St. Croix. He had to go to St. Croix after Nevis.
the problem with this is he at the time he's pretty much a nobody.
Yep.
So like finding documents of when and where he moved with who and what it is been just an issue I've found just trying to research this myself. So
Yep.
It's all kind of speculative. You have key points, but you don't know exactly when and where.
Yep. And we do have a registrar, right? He maintained generally he maintained correspondence with his father because his father left because
he went to go get some milk.
Yeah, and he never came back, and he didn't wait until he was, the treasurer of the United States of America. He just didn't come back, right? But he still maintained contact with his father. His father still cared. His father was honor bound by his father and their family to more or less avoid Rachel Fawcett and James Jr. and Alexander.
Yeah.
However, like at what point do you say like screw my honor? Like I'm just gonna be a dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was different back then though. Like we can't use the how we feel as men today in a society that, kind of just they cared about a bloodline, but also being a bastard was a big deal. Being a bastard's pretty normal today.
Oh yeah, I'm just curious
So
if he ever was going to come back from the gas station from getting smokes from Habib.
Habibi.
Habibi.
Oh shoot. So he comes to America. He's met with this.
Hold on. Before
Oh,
you do the America,
okay.
hold on.
Hit me.
Because I think this is important. So and I don't mean to interrupt you. I fucking love you.
Please interrupt me.
All right. 6th September of 1772. Alexander Hamilton writes a letter to the Royal Danish American Gazette that gains the attention of Hugh Knox, who is I'm going to fuck this up, Presbyterian minister and journalist in St. Croix. He sees how well that Alexander writes, and on this and this alone, he raises the funds to send him to Boston to attend college. And actually, in hopes at that time, Hugh Knox was hoping that he would come back as a physician. I'm gonna break the news to you real quickly there, Hugh Knox. He doesn't come back. Yeah, he ain't coming back.
He is his father's son.
All right, sorry. So continue.
No. So this is kind of where it gets pretty fun, at least in my opinion. Hamilton just comes to America and he gets met with this like revolutionary fervor, right? Like this is unprecedented. We're in the age of enlightenment. We're in the age of like liberties and all of that jazz. Like there's just some razzle dazzle in the air. And that segues me to this beautiful book, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Yeah. And I think this book is got some craziness to it. Okay. Everyone's heard that this is a pamphlet. It is a pamphlet. It's just a 79-page pamphlet. Call it a book if you will. But it was kind of like an unprecedented opinion at the time. So Common Sense was written by Thomas Paine, who had immigrated over here for 14 months before he wrote this. He was barely over here a year. But during that year, it was during the time of like the Second Continental Congress. So none of independence wasn't talked about yet. Like we are still trying to just beg beg King George to listen to us because we have lost faith. I say we because I'm an American, get over it. Because we have lost faith that Parliament would stand for us, which is true. They didn't care,
No.
at all, because we were just lowly colonists. But to us, we were English citizens. But to them, we were just colonists. We were second class citizens. Anyway, I can
I
go on.
order you to be quiet.
But
What
get out of here.
Who does he think he is?
We are the knights who say me. uh, no, we're not doing it. But it really, when Thomas Paine writes this, he kind of just goes off the rails because he's talking to this guy named Benjamin Rush, right? And Benjamin Rush would later go on to be a Congress member.
Mhm.
And fun fact before we get into it, Thomas Paine wanted to name this Plain Truth. Benjamin
No.
Rush changed it to Common Sense.
I love that Benjamin Rush changed it.
Yeah, that was my opinion too.
Yep.
There was one more thing that got struck out later. Give me a second. I want to know your opinion on it though.
Okay.
But Common Sense, it kind of goes into the whole Enlightenment feeling where like natural right logic, like what are liberties and what are rights. I know when we were talking about the podcast before we started recording, we were talking about like what are liberties versus rights, and I always put the definition of a liberty as something that can only be taken from you. It can never be given to you. Things such as life.
Yep.
Just as an example, whereas a right, I would say, would be security. Like, I don't feel like everyone has the security. I feel like we have a right to security. But that's based on my morals and my ethics more so. It's what others can do for me. Others cannot hurt me. And that would
Yeah,
make
I
me
would.
feel secure.
And we talked about this earlier. The only argument I would
Yes.
make behind that is that I think that your choices in life can deteriorate that security. So in one way, shape, or form, it can be taken away from you by your choices, right? Your choices
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
detract from that.
Absolutely. And not to get all philosophical, but that is the environment that Hamilton came into America with, was what was in Common Sense.
Yep.
And this was widespread too. So 125,000 copies of Common Sense got sold. That doesn't sound like crazy amounts, right? 125,000.
How many were in here?
I'm telling you, like at the times, like if you were going to Philadelphia or like New York, like a large newspaper like the New York Times would only sell 1,000 copies.
Yep.
So 125,000 copies of this is just astronomical. And it was just because it was so easy to read. Like there's a quote from the time. It's one of those primary sources that doesn't really have a name attached to it. It's just a random tidbit of a letter. A great.
So I'm gonna add something to add a little bit of
Okay.
just kind of emphasis to that, right? At the time, and this includes slaves, there was only 2.5 million people in the colonies in the Northern Hemisphere. So somewhat of what you said, how many copies were sold?
125,000.
Okay. So
was that about
5%? Now 50, I would say 15-20% based on the fact that the slaves were part of that census.
Very well. I can get behind that.
And I'm sure that indigenous natives who were living within the bounds of the colonies are also in that census.
True. And that's not even including the people who heard it word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Which is another
read.
Yeah, which is another reason why it being written so easily was such a selling point. That, and it was like dirt cheap to buy.
Yep.
And he made that intentional. But there was a letter that was talking about Common Sense, and it said that Paine spoke a language that the colonists felt but had never thought. And I think that's kind of cool because it's like we feel discontent, but we don't know how to think it. We don't know why we're pissed off at King George. We're just kind of pissed off. And in Common Sense, to its T is just a 79-page document absolutely ripping up monarchies. That's all it is. I mean, it talks
Yep.
about constitutions and all that jazz, but I mean, he's talking about King George like he's a brute. Like, oh, are we supposed to eat our own young too, George? Like, he's just calling him an asshole, like right,
Yep.
like to his
It,
face.
it's
It was
it's
a
a
shock
Facebook.
value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a Facebook shit talking post, right?
yeah.
And,
Dude just wanted to. He just wanted to come out swinging. Like,
and you know, it's funny the correlation. I opened this up with Geoffrey Chaucer, right?
yeah.
Or Geoffrey Chaucer. Um, he actually wrote the Canterbury Tales, and as common of language vernacular as
Hmm.
possible, so that the commoner, the peasant, would be able to read it. And
You mean
it
specifically the book about the peasant?
yep, yep. So now we see that in common sense, and it's a catalyst. It's a catalyst
Yeah,
for
I
the
would have to agree.
mindset that it happened after Boston Tea Party, though, right?
Correct.
Yep. So things are already kind of burning, right?
Yeah, they're deteriorating fast. So that he was writing and published this during the Second Continental Congress, which met in July of 75. Five.
Yep.
Um, yeah, you do the same thing I do where you go back a year because Marine Corps.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
you can't do that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it fucks me up every time.
Every time. So 1775 in July, the Second Continental Congress goes trying to make peace in a sense with King George. They end up making a Marine Corps.
Yep.
Uh,
On Tavern, Philadelphia. November 10th,
and
1775.
and so the start of the Continental Congress, Second Continental Congress, sorry, is we're trying to have appeasement with King George.
Yep.
By the end of the Second Continental Congress in 1776, we're at the Declaration.
Yep.
So a lot happens in that little time frame there, and I may be wrong because I don't have this source, but I do believe that Common Sense came out in January of 76. So
I'll do
about,
you a favor right now.
yeah, just do that while I keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's happening. Like, people are getting discontent and they're questioning what liberties are. And that's why I really enjoy asking people what they believe liberties actually are, and how much he shit talks monarchs. I have a quote
Mm-hmm.
here. It's, but where say someone is the king of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute in Britain.
Oh,
Talking trash.
yep. Just shit talking,
Just
man.
that's
Which
all.
is, and that was published January 10th, 1776.
So January 17th. Hell yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Off the
So,
dome.
yep. You just fucking nailed it, right? So, with that being said, it's funny that we talk about Thomas Paine and we talk about common sense, because now this podcast is about an individual that was pretty decent at talking shit.
Yeah. Talking shit on everybody.
Yes.
Did not care.
No.
But a quick story before we get back to Hamilton, just because looking into Thomas Paine is just actually mind-boggling. Do you know where he's buried?
Philadelphia?
Nope, nobody does.
Are you serious?
I am so serious. Okay, so Thomas Paine, when he died, he wanted to be buried in a quake. Yeah, you're gonna look it up. You're gonna see that I'm right. Thomas Paine wanted to be buried in a Quaker cemetery, but the Quakers were so worried. Wait, you're getting there. Let me guess. There's a bunch of articles of people who have parts of Thomas Paine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, where's his head? Probably like Philly. His hands
Yep.
in London.
Yep.
His, like,
Australia.
his
What the
foot's in
fuck?
Sydney. Yeah, whatever. But but the Quakers didn't want to make his burial site like a momentous site. They didn't want to have like a celebrity attached to it. They didn't want it to be all touristy,
Yep.
so to
Because the
say.
Quakers didn't believe in that.
Exactly. So he ended up being buried in a small farm in upstate New York, right? He happily buried for a couple of years. Then this man named William Cobbett
Oh yeah.
bought bought that farm and decided to unbury or disinter, if you will, but
Or exhume.
yeah, like all of it. Just disinter the body and just take him on a freak show, no more or less. Like he wanted to
Yeah.
take him back to London and build this just grand memorial of Thomas Paine. And guess what? The guy who shit talked them so much, they didn't want him there. Come to find out.
So it's funny that you bring that up because what William Cobbett wanted to do was he wanted to give Thomas Paine a funeral and a procession worthy of Thomas Paine. His exact words, and keep in mind, I don't quote the Britannica that often. It's not a great source, but his exact words were he wanted to give Thomas Paine a funeral worthy of his contributions to humanity.
Which will get funnier at the end.
Yeah.
It didn't sell. So what do you do with the bones of Thomas Paine, right? Any logical man would be like, "Oh, I'll just go bury them again or give them to his family."
They
He
had
puts
eBay
a
back then, right?
yes, yeah, for sure.
Sell them
No,
on eBay.
he stuffs them in a trunk. Puts just like a chest, right? Like the Pirates of the Caribbean, just Davy Jones locker chest. And he takes them back to New England.
New
And
Rochelle.
they sit on a farm, and then William Cobbett dies. So his son inherits the farm and the trunk. His son, for lack of better terms, does not do too well at the horse tracks. So all of his stuff gets just repossessed and auctioned off. The auctioneer finds Thomas Paine's body in the trunk, says, "Whoa, I'll sell a lot of things. Sometimes people, but never dead people." So he takes the trunk from the farm, and then we don't know.
That's fucking insane. That
That's
is fucking
insane.
insane.
And you know what's even crazier? And this is just irony to boot. One of Thomas Paine's dying wishes was to, on his tombstone, say Thomas Paine, author of Common Sense. The dude doesn't have a tombstone because the dude is missing.
Yep. Yeah,
One of his dying wishes was for a tombstone, something that you would think is just a given.
I mean, outside of the Headless Horseman, we are in October. I don't know of anybody else that was abducted upon burial. Thomas Paine
John
was.
blank.
Yep, Thomas Paine was.
Thomas Paine.
Well, I guess
right.
William Wallace was.
I'm sure there's more, but like let's how does someone like that just go missing? Like someone so he's in every history textbook about the American Revolution, and
Yep.
we just don't know where this dude's at.
Yep. Yeah,
We have a History Channel show about finding Hitler, but we can't find Thomas Paine.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, it's you know that rabbit hole thing that we talk about. We've gone down that rabbit hole.
Oh,
we're down that rabbit hole.
Oh, we're like 12 minutes down that rabbit
Hey, listen,
hole.
dude. All of these things tie together. We cannot help this.
No, I got it. And these are the feelings of people in the colonies when Hamilton arrives. Also, fun fact, everyone says that Hamilton's like an immigrant. Hamilton's not an immigrant. He was born down there in Nevis, which was a British colony. And then he went to Boston, which was another British colony. Yeah, dude was British until he was American. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
And fought fervently to become an American.
Oh, yeah. But that's to come.
Yes.
First, he's got to get rejected from college. Like any good American does. I'll let you take the lead on that one, though.
All right. So Hamilton comes up to Boston. He originally tries to get into Princeton. And he walks into Princeton, braggadocious as shit, right? Just a big ego. Here's Alexander Hamilton. right? The people of St. Croix just paid for me to come up here.
As I was born in 1755, I'm a man of about 19.
Negative. I was born in 1757. Yeah, 1755. I was a man of about 19. Yes, you're correct. And this is something I didn't know that Matt enlightened me on earlier. What's the normal college age at this time?
About 15.
Mm-hmm. Right.
15
So,
is standard.
yep. So, way different back then than what our current social and cultural standards are. Right.
You also have to remember that they didn't go for things like computer science degrees. They went and studied things that just furthered their education, things like philosophy and
Yeah,
histories
mainly
and
liberal arts.
sciences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was liberal arts.
But
Some STEM.
it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to go be a lawyer.
Yep.
It was like, I'm doing all of this and interpreting the law as well.
Yep. So he applies to Princeton, asks for an accelerated program. And actually Matt cued me in on this earlier, is because of his age, Princeton was like,
rejected.
yeah, Princeton's like, hey buddy, I don't know how to tell you this, but in fewer or less terms, fuck no. Right. So he ends up attending King's College. So
And
Princeton's
says
in New York.
And says he was born in 1757, a man of about 17.
Yep. Yep. So Princeton is in the New York realm,
Mhm.
right? King's College, now Columbia, we all know is in the Boston area, which also is a hotbed for the revolution.
Oh, I love Boston and the Revolution.
Yep. Yep.
They are just, it's the most, honestly, it's the most Boston thing. Like, I think the legacy is carried over to today, where I could just say that's a Boston thing, and everyone kind of knows, like, oh no, like just
Yep.
the guy with the fist up in the air. He's
Yep.
got like that Italian Boston accent mix, and yeah,
Yep.
they're just fighters, and they like their subs.
So now, because this is a hotbed for the revolution, old Aham would be an onlooker at a few open air meetings by patriot leaders condemning England and vying for the rights of American colonists. Keep in mind, independence was not a discussion that was of the majority yet.
Yeah,
basically, they just wanted their rights.
Yeah. Same thing as I was saying with common sense, like same time period, like independence was crazy.
Yep. Yeah, independence would be like abolitionist and emancipationist, right? That's kind of like the difference here. Yep. Abolitionists were stone cold, like, nope, it ends today. Emancipationists were like, let's kind of take it easy. Let's slow down a little bit, right?
Yep.
And
let's just work on it over time.
Yep.
It'll be okay.
Yep. And most of the Continental Congress and even the people that were doing the open air meetings at this point were just talking about the rights of English colonists, really,
honestly, because they viewed themselves as English colonists and Englishmen. They just wanted all of the liberties afforded to Englishmen in London.
Yep. And the colonists, and it's funny, we'll actually talk about this on the next podcast a little bit. But there was a lot of things that happened in the late 17th century before we moved into the 18th century where we are now. Like taking Massachusetts Bay Colony and making it one, instead of Salem, Boston, and Plymouth having their own just charters. It becomes Massachusetts Bay Colony, right? So there's a fear that like their religious persecution and things like that are going to come back into play here.
Which that actually brings me up to the topic of what was also cut out of common sense. And I want to know if you think it was right to cut it out or if you like it.
Mm-hmm.
It was cut out by Benjamin Franklin. And it says, a greater absurdity cannot be conceived of that than 3 millions of people running to the seacoast each time a ship arrives from London to know what portion of liberty they should enjoy. Oh, and it got cut.
I think that's good.
I think that's great. I think it's great because it really symbolizes like, hey, we wanted to be English. We just wanted to be the same kind of English that you guys in London are.
Yep. As a matter of fact, many of us are. Yes, there are Dutch, there are Normans because there's still Normans at the time, right? There are Dutch, there are Normans, there are French, there are Spanish, there are many different.
And then
However, many of the ones that came from uh, that we consider Dutch were only considered Dutch because they escaped England because they had religious differences there. Granted, only 1/3 of the Mayflower was actually Puritans, so let's not let that little bit of like
we're not to
American
Thanksgiving
fable.
yet. We're not
Yeah.
to Thanksgiving yet.
Well, we're actually past Thanksgiving. We're well past Thanksgiving in the timeline. Not yet, but
Oh, I meant for the podcast.
yeah. Don't worry, Friendsgiving is happening and you're coming.
I got you.
All right. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. We'll let you continue.
Oh, we were just talking about how we went to King's College.
Yep.
So he goes and applies to King's College, right? And he's like, I was born in 1755, seven.
Seven.
Woo! Who knows? A man of about 17,
Yeah.
which which makes him more enticing to get accepted because he's not too much older. Um, and while he was there, he blew people away. Like not necessarily professors, but like just in the time frame. Like he was in the accelerated courses and he was beyond that. Like the dude could read, the dude could write. He was bored doing the courses. Like it's absurd. And how people write about him learning is nothing but good things. It, I've never seen someone like prosper so much in college than A. Ham during this
Yeah.
time frame.
Yeah,
Like,
and I think it's important because outside of being on the $10 bill, really before, and we'll get to this later, before Manuel Miranda really does the Hamilton musical, I think part of how brilliant and how great this man was is kind of lost. And I think that we're kind of torn. I'd say like 25-75. There's a lot of Aham haters out there.
yeah, they're wrong.
Yeah, specifically the radical Republicans, right, at this time. Um,
Democratic
yeah,
Republicans.
Democratic Republicans. I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. We're not radical yet. That's not till Reconstruction.
1861 is when the
Yeah.
Republican Party was found.
Yep.
60.
So, yeah. So I mean, there's just a lot going on, and I do
Yeah.
believe that during this time, while he's in college,
The
is when
Intolerable Acts is the big one.
yeah. What was his major, by the way? Do you know?
Law. He's a lawyer.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Actually, a super successful lawyer too. Pissed Aaron Burr right off, but we'll get
into
there.
that later. Yep. But I believe that while he's in college, and correct me if I'm wrong, he writes A Farmer Refuted.
Yes, because that's when the Intolerable Acts get passed because of the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Tea Party happens, and if we're not familiar, people don't remember there was it junior year of high school and haven't taken a class about it since. The Intolerable Acts was something passed down because of the Boston Tea Party, and it pretty much closed Boston Harbor. Which, if you know anything about how money works at the time, that's pretty shitty.
Yep.
So it was 40 oh man, it's a couple tons worth of tea that they dumped. I mean, it was a ton of money, like an absolute ton of money. And this dude named Samuel Seabury, which people should remember from if they've seen, I'm assuming everyone's seen the musical here just because of the number of people who have asked me about it that I know
Yeah.
listen to the
Yeah.
podcast. So Samuel Seabury comes around and is just like, we need to be loyal to the crown and just pay the money back. Everyone needs to work extra and just do all of this. And Hamilton, how what I say to you, Hamilton writes a response, and more or less, it turns out to be 60,000 words. right? Which, if anyone's ever just written a long paper for like college or even high school or just work, a long email, you just look at the words and you're going to be in like the couple hundred, maybe 1,000, like, and
Yep.
it's going to be a decently long paper. Dude went on for 60,000 words just talking shit on the king and on Samuel Seabury in particular, to the point where he actually had to leave. Like, he did not feel safe in Boston anymore. He
Yep.
left.
So it's funny, and the reason it's called A Farmer Refuted is because Seabury writes this under a pseudonym, under the name of
Yes.
A.W. Farmer, is what he writes this.
Yes.
The initial. What's the initial one called? It's a farmers.
I don't even know, because Farmers Refuted is just so good.
Yeah. Hold on. No, I'm gonna look
We'll
that up.
figure it out. No, you keep
So
talking. I'll look it up.
with that being said, he writes A Farmer Refuted, and basically it describes his distaste for the Articles of Association. And in it, he writes, the spirit that breathes throughout is so rancorous, illiberal, and imperious. The argumentative of part of it is so puerile and fallacious. The misrepresentations of fact so palpable and flagrant. The criticisms so illiterate, trifling, and absurd. The conceits so low, sterile, and splenetic that I will venture to pronounce it one of the most ludicrous performances which has been exhibited to public view during all present controversy.
Liked to talk.
And it's just shit talking. He basically tells this dude that Billy Madison, the the
Honestly,
diet, yeah,
that's such a good comparison.
yeah, the diatribe that you just went on held no weight, and now everybody who has read it is now dumber for having read your dissertation.
It's called Letters of a Westchester Farmer.
Yep,
It's not even a cool name.
yep,
Samuel Seabury.
yep.
What a dude.
And really, he kind of does give him, before he shit talks him in that quote I just read. Right before that, what he does say, that is Aham, what he does say is that the guy can write. I'll give him that.
Oh, yeah.
And then he goes into what I just read, which is 18th century shit talking, and an 8,000, oh no, 80,000, right?
80,000.
How many words? How many words?
60,000. Sorry.
60,000.
60,000.
So I want to give you guys an example as we do this. We write storyboards for every one of our podcasts, and we put all of our sites inside that storyboard. I have one. I'll use our next podcast as an example because it's a little bit longer as far as what notes I have. Including the sites, I have 4,684 words, and it only comes out to 13 pages. For those of you familiar with Chicago Turabian style, I also have the sites in there.
Dude, nobody's familiar with Chicago Turabian style but us.
They might be. There's historians out there, dude. There's historians out there. There's historians out there listening to us.
Okay. All right.
So what that means is I put words at the bottom of every page that basically cite and show you where I found that source and where I found that information. So it's 4,684 words at 13 pages, including all my sites, which aren't words. This dude comes out with
60,000 word document.
Massive. This is huge. Probably a 120-page document. And it's all, they don't have computers. It's written in pen and quill.
Yeah.
Pen and quill.
That's the other thing is like, so what's really cool is, and we'll get to this in the Federalist Papers, but there are portions of the Federalist Papers that are in Elizabeth Schuyler's, well, Elizabeth Hamilton, however, her penmanship, but they're his words, because he would write until he couldn't, and then she would write, and then he would write again. Like, that's how much this dude wrote.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it? That's love.
You know,
Well,
and
besides Reynolds, but that's love.
I say that because my wife does the same thing, right? So for our next podcast, I'm not going to dive into it too deep, but until the end. But for our next podcast, Sammy sat here and literally researched for 2 days with me. We probably spent 38 hours alone on that one, just doing the research and putting it in there. And that is the relationship between, really at the time, Alexander and Elizabeth.
Okay, so I kind of have a somewhat comparison. I tried to pick a book that most people know the general thickness of, right?
Yep.
So 60,000 words, Farmers Refuted. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is only 76,000 words. So it's not the same. It is a little bit thicker, but not by much.
Dude, that's
You know,
nuts. That's
like
nuts.
so that's not like an article in a newspaper. That's like a no shit. Hey, you're so dumb I wrote a book about you.
Oh, dude, it's fantastic. So, and it's funny because that is Alexander Hamilton.
Oh yeah.
He's going to go well above and beyond to basically tell you, so I read your thing and you're dumb.
And keep in mind, how long do you think it took J.K. Rowling to write the Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stone if you're American? How many years, maybe months? I don't even know. But I can tell you right now that between Farmers Refuted and whatever Samuel Seabury called his Letters of Westchester Farmer, there was only a couple like weeks between the two. So I mean, we're talking like this dude wrote 3/4 of Harry Potter in just a matter of weeks, just based off of emotion. And that's another thing that people don't really seem to understand is like this dude was emotionally writing. He was a very romantic writer, which will come in. I hate that we say this so much, which will come into play a little bit later, but he was a very romantic writer.
So we can hate that, but I think that
I love that.
And two, I think that our listeners, and we got a lot of good feedback at my retirement, and think actually, as a matter of fact,
it was nice meeting all of you, including Major Foose, who DJ says we've been friends for years, but I met for the first time last week. So
yeah. So with that being said, you got a shout out from him during my retirement speech.
I know I did.
Matt got a shout out from during my retirement speech for our podcast, right?
Hey, you're welcome.
Yep. Which, with that being said, I think our listeners appreciate that we do this in some sort of chronological order. Yes, we don't do the bells and whistles and soundboard that some of these history podcasts do, but that's because me and Matt are just sitting here drinking and bullshitting.
Yeah, we're just two dudes.
Yeah.
We were doing this before we started recording.
Yeah. If you want us to do the bells and whistles and give you cannon sounds in the background to give you your war boner or whatever it is that you need during our podcast, then sure. But we're just here talking about history.
That's it. So he's in college. We're going to try to stay on track here.
Yep.
He's in college and he meets up with some of the boys, right? I think he meets up with his boys. And who are these boys? John Lawrence, the Marquis de Lafayette, Hercules Mulligan, like the boys, right? And this is where people actually start to criticize, like historically, start to criticize his writings romantically. There's a historian, James T. Flexner, who actually dives deep into the correspondence between John Lawrence and Hamilton. It says, eh?
Yep.
Yeah. Same with the Marquis de Lafayette. He kind of says the same thing, and it's I don't know if this guy's just fixating on Hamilton just trying to be controversially romantic, or if he believes it. So I'm assuming he believes it if he's willing to write about it.
No, I will tell you that Marquis de Lafayette, dude, that dude enamored a lot of people, to include George Washington.
Oh yeah.
Right, that was like a son to him.
and he was such a good he was a good dude. Okay. Like I have tried to see like certain aspects of that guy that I was just like, wow, I'm trying to find out how you're just like a stuck up Frenchman. And I couldn't do it.
Nope.
Like overall, he cared about America, he cared about his friends, and he cared about France. Like that
Yep.
was it.
Yep.
The
Marquis
the
de Lafayette is a
the fact
whole nother, a
oh
whole nother.
man. Oh man.
That dude's fantastic.
Honestly, though, and when I was out in Virginia, they had this method actor who was French for sure. Um, but I actually talked to him, and he was like willing to answer historical questions, and I was like, "Hey," and I have a video of this as well, so maybe DJ will put it up on our Facebook.
Yep.
Um, but I asked him, I was like, "Hey, what kind of reaction or the relationship between you and Hamilton when we didn't send any French or any foreign aid to France during the revolution? Because obviously you were in France fighting the revolution. Were you upset, or were you just like understanding?" And there's a cool answer. I'm gonna send the video to DJ. He'll put it up. If you want the answer, go look at it. So he meets these group of revolutionary like radicals. We'll call them. We can call we can call them patriots. We can call them traitors. We can call them whatever we want. All we know is that, ooh, what you got?
It's a Hawaiian. You don't want none of this.
Why not? I love pineapple on pizza.
That's my dude.
uh,
We just lost. We just lost subscribers.
I know we did. Um, but that leads up to the revolution, and the revolution is such a broad topic that I know we're going to get sidetracked in. But ultimately, what the revolution is to a lot of people at this time, not just Alexander Hamilton, but it is a method of building a rapport, it is building a legacy, and it is building a name for yourself. That is why everyone is vying for commissions, appointments, even small appointments. People are just like, yes, I want that, because now we're at war. This is where, I mean, you have, not yet, but you'll have your Napoleons, you have your Alexander the Greats, you have your Julius Caesars. You got to think all of these famous people in history that we just can bat off from 1500 2000 years ago. What are they? They're successful generals. And outside of that, what did Julius, outside of becoming the emperor by force, what did Julius Caesar do? There's people who could tell you. I guarantee you some of our subscribers could tell you, but a vast majority, I mean, they just know how he became emperor.
Yep.
Same with Alexander the Great. What do you know about him at all, except for the fact that the dude was more successful and he was younger than me, and it hurts me every day.
I actually know quite a bit about Alexander the Great, but I'm going to leave that for another podcast.
Very well, which is fine because I know of Alexander. I know some of Macedonia's history, but I'm not too well versed. And we're not talking about Macedonia right now. We're talking about America.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it is, that people want to make a name for themselves. They want those commissions, and of course Hamilton wants all of that as well. So when he gets to have an opportunity to be somebody like Nathaniel Greene, general, right? Yeah. When Nathaniel Greene, who's a general at the time, which is a huge deal. People don't understand how it's not a huge deal. It's a huge deal to be a general. Everyone can be a lieutenant colonel, but nobody can be a general. So General Greene offers him the position to be on his staff as an aide. And Hamilton straight up says, "Nah, dude, like that ain't me. Like I'm a fighter," and turns him down cold. Unprecedented, because all he wanted was to make a name for himself. And eventually, who comes walking in? George Mother Washington.
Yep.
Like the dude. Which, funnily enough, do you know the story of how he got appointed to be the chief commander in chief of the First Continental Army?
I do. It was actually an act of Continental Congress,
It
and
was.
they deliberated on it for a while. And it's funny because he thinks back to like his time under Braddock and all the time in the French and Indian War and what had happened then. And he straight up told when they elected him as the commander of the Continental Army, he was like, "Hey, I don't promise you grandeur. What I can promise you is that I will give it everything I have, and I will put my entire soul into this army for our cause." But he's not really resistant of it.
He doesn't. He acts like he doesn't want it.
Uh-huh.
Like he acts like he's just there, and if he gets it, he'll take it. But like he doesn't. He doesn't want it. But that's how he acts.
Mm-hmm.
Now his actions outside of him saying all of that say differently. The dude randomly shows up in his old officer's uniform from the
Yep.
7 Years War,
Yep.
or the as our American brethren will know as the French and Indian War,
Yep.
which was not fought against the French versus the Indian. Common misconception.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's known as the 7 Years War.
Outside of
How
here.
how long do you think the 7 Years War lasted?
It actually lasted about 12, I think.
Nine.
9.
9 years. Why they called it seven? I'm assuming it had to deal with paperwork. Had to. Bureaucracy at work.
Yep. Yep. So
But
keep me in mind, and this podcast is about Alexander Hamilton, but it's important to note that George Washington was not necessarily successful during the French and Indian War.
no.
He was under an English general. Things did not go well, and they got slaughtered. They got
He was only
slaughtered.
a lieutenant. Just
Yep.
FYI, people. He wasn't
Yep.
a general either. He was just a lieutenant.
But Nathaniel Greene was a brigadier general
Yes.
when he approached it. For anybody who's not Marine Corps, be my little general.
1 star.
Yep. Yep. Brigadier, major, lieutenant general, and then
General.
4-star general. Yeah.
So Hamilton, Buck Lieutenant, Butterbar, says nah to General Greene, waits him out, steals a bunch of cannons in New York, right?
Yes.
like straight up just says, hey, y'all don't need these.
Yep.
And because George is going that way, I think he's gonna need these. So I'm gonna take them to him. And he just straight up steals like 6 cannons from the British.
Yep.
Just fucking beats feet. Like
Keep in mind, they're pulling these things with ropes through
yeah,
the city of New York.
gangster stuff.
And
Like,
he hands his musket to one of his buddies as they're stealing these cannons. They get about 5 or 6 city blocks, and at this point, the British are firing at them.
Just chasing them.
Yep.
Just like you
and
crazy kids, get back here.
He looks at his buddy and goes, "Hey, where's my rifle?" And his friend had laid his rifle down to help get one of the cannons. Alexander Hamilton runs back to the fort that they were firing upon to get his rifle back, his musket, and get back to the cannons.
Lieutenant Hamilton wasn't in 3-6.
Oh.
Anyway, so after he steals all these cannons from New York, he's officially on Washington's radar. I mean, the dude wants him. And Washington is fighting this war, right? And he's losing, like losing bad, because England rolls up with the most powerful navy, blockades the ports, not always successfully, but for the most part, until we can establish a relative navy. Blocks the port, and by relative navy, I mean we wait for the French to come over with their navy so we can start building a navy, more or less. But he's losing this war, and DJ and I were talking about this before the podcast, but George Washington, I believe, was a great tactician. He just never had the manpower to back up his plans, because every time that dude had a solid plan with solid manpower, it was just brilliant.
Yep.
However, he realized very early on that the 1 year enlistments and the lack of centralized governance, because keep in mind, people don't seem to understand that we are going through the revolution without a clear outcome. We are just 13 independent colonies who have banded
Alliances.
together. We're alliances.
Yep.
That's it. We're the Greek city states.
Yep.
Like, that's all we were at the time. But we knew that we couldn't beat them without everyone on our team, which is why we got the 13 colonies.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't even know if there's no centralized, yeah, we have a continental congress, but what power does it actually hold? This gets really important later on.
Yep.
But what power actually hold to send out funding, to mandate military service, to regulate militias? It doesn't. There's no clear cut answer
To pay.
because yeah, exactly. Which, just BT dubs, Washington never took a salary from the federal government, but what he did do was track his expenses for the army because he
Yep.
paid out of pocket. That's the kind of dude
Yep.
Washington was. Paid out of pocket and got reimbursed by the government. I think it ended up being only around 75% of what he spent.
Yep.
So Washington damn near funded a quarter of the army for a time there, but that's semantics, honestly.
Now, real quick, because we are talking a lot about what Washington has lost, but what brought us here to New York is the fact that Washington, and again, this podcast is not about Washington, but this is important because it brings us to Aham, right? Is that Washington fabricated an entire artillery section to move up onto a hill on redoubts and with palisades and protection in one night. Meaning they waited till the British fell asleep in Boston. They woke up the next morning and looked to their southern hill, and now cannons that can reach Boston are overlooking Boston, and Boston surrendered.
Loaded, ready to go.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, surprise, just like
They actually tried to shoot at the Continental Army at that point, could not reach them, and the Continental Army is like, yeah, guess what? I can reach you.
Which is funny when we get to readouts 9 and 10.
Yeah. So not to get on Washington and what he did, but that was a fantastic move that brought him to New York. And when Washington went to New York, he knew that he was in trouble because of the causeways and the waterways and everything that led around there. But then,
New York was also kind of like a centralized, like, cultural hub too.
Yep.
Like, it was more metaphoric than anything else because obviously we have Philadelphia as the impromptu capital.
Yep.
But New York City is just like the place. It's America, like, incarnate as a city at the time.
Yep. So we go into New York knowing that we're in trouble. But you have individuals like Alexander Hamilton that go into a British fort, steal all the cannons. Eventually, the noise is heard, so the ship starts shooting at the fort, steals all the cannons. His buddy loses his rifle because his buddy was in 3.6, and then he goes back and gets his rifle back, right? I was in 3.6 for all the listeners that don't know.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, not when the rifles were lost, though, right? That's where the meme started.
That was like a week after I got out of the Marine Corps, too.
Yep.
I left my little booty off.
So, with that being said, in all of this loss, George Washington is looking down at this individual, Alexander Hamilton, that's doing amazing things and taking away from the enemy.
Keep in mind, he's only like 20.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's common misconception now. I see a lot on like TikTok. Like, the founding fathers were only like 22. Why are we listening to? When we wrote the Constitution, it was different. And honestly, most of the people who wrote the Constitution were in their 40s. But I digress. He's young, very young for what his commission is now. Because at the time here, when he becomes, right after he steals the cannons and links up and becomes the aide to Washington, he becomes a lieutenant colonel.
Yep.
Because the rank structure my military people out there, like, the rank structure is totally different now. I mean, there was only like 5 enlisted ranks, like 4. You had lieutenant captain, lieutenant colonel, colonel, and then general, major general,
Yep.
and then general. Like
Yep.
it was something, and then you have all of the brevets, and that means something. Anyway, he's a lieutenant colonel at the time. Anyway, lieutenant colonel at the time, and something really cool about Hamilton, like during the war, as George Washington's aide, is it got to the point where he was so trusted by Washington that he practically gave orders under Washington's signature. Um, so there's actually a story uh, covering Washington moving to New York, or moving from New York, sorry, where Hamilton rides up to meet General Plummer, Putman, General Putman of the New Jersey militia, and demands that two brigades oof, two brigades be sent south to aid Washington. And his reasoning for telling him to do that to Washington was, keep in mind, he's lieutenant colonel, and he just told the major general what to do, right? Under George Washington's name. So he writes to Washington later and said, "Hey, this is happening. I figured this would be something that was just, something small for you, that would really help you out. And I just decided to make that decision based on that assumption." And that's just kind of how it went. So this dude took a lot of liberty, and I actually have that direct quote here. "I concluded you would not disapprove of a measure calculated to strengthen you, if not for just a small time, and ventured to adopt it on that presumption alone." Dude was just like, yeah, Big Daddy Washington would probably say this is a good idea. So so I'm just gonna, but that was normal for the time because of the relationship that Washington had with Hamilton, which, another misconception about the musical, it was full of tension. They got along great. Like, same with the Marquis. Well, the Marquis de Lafayette, because there's multiple Marquises if
Yep.
you know French things. The Marquis de Lafayette saw Hamilton as just another son figure, or he took on a more parental role. And when Hamilton, how do I want to say it? When Hamilton was making those decisions, it wasn't something that Washington ever had to worry about, because they were all well thought out. And even so, when people were when Alexander Hamilton felt so unappreciated that he demanded a commission to a battlefield company and was denied by Washington because he was too important, he quit. And when someone else tried to pick him up on the staff, and I can't remember who for the life of me, he wrote to Washington and asked what kind of character Hamilton had, and it was nothing but great things. And that just speaks highly upon Hamilton as a servant leader, I would even say.
Yep.
Because the dude knew how to take orders, but also knew how to have an opinion.
So, but I think it's important to note here too, like as they're leaving, at this point, they're kind of leaving New York. They do kind of fortify Upper Harlem at this point.
Yeah, but they just pretty much abandon it.
Yep. They what they do is they do the classic George Washington, which is leave the fires burning at night and they escape in the middle of the night, right?
Which is a great strategy if you're winning a war. As Hamilton put it, they weren't winning a war of attrition. They were just trying to win a war of attrition against England's credit.
Yep.
So the longer they could carry on the war, the better chance that England would be like, we can't afford this, and just give up. Which is,
no spin. No.
Say it with me, exactly how it happened. Like,
yep.
They couldn't afford the Hessians anymore.
Yeah, and that's funny because we get into the next part, and the next part is, I think, where Alexander Hamilton really gets an opportunity. Granted, he is George Washington's aide de camp at this point, but he gets an opportunity to show some of his brilliance at this point.
I have to agree.
So I do believe they're camped at Valley Forge still at this point. And they come down from Valley Forge to Staten Island.
Mhm.
And at this point, it's funny because a lot of the British, it is traditional back then that at this time, it's winter. We don't fight.
Yeah.
We don't fight at winter, right? We take a break.
Taliban rules. Fighting
Yep.
season, non-fighting season.
Yep. We take a break. We're going to take a break. No fighting. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Charles Lee's captured at this point. Charles Lee's captured.
I'm a general.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the other generals, we start to see a Saratoga campaign from England that has stopped. It has stopped abruptly prior to this. It is, get you a drink. It is Christmas Eve of 1770. I want to say 7 at this point. Matt will correct me as soon as he's done making his drink. But we move into 1776. It is December 26th of 1776. We move into the Battle of Trenton. And this is where the Americans decide, yeah, I know the English don't really want to fight right now, but we want to fight. And I think we've got enough to put the fight to them. And they start the Battle of Trenton at nighttime. With that being said, we move on to first the Hessians. And the Hessians are who George Washington is fighting. And I believe at this point on Staten Island, it's somewhere around 2,000 Hessians that George Washington goes into with him and the Marquis and everybody else. But at the same time, simultaneously, the artillery is doing what the artillery should be doing, which is, one, covering George Washington's retreat, but also covering any fields or areas where there's garrison troops that can more or less move down and resupply or reinforce any troops that are committed to the battle at the point. This is where I would say that some level of irony comes into play. There are British that are holed up in the Nassau building of Princeton.
Yes.
Which is more or less their administration's building, which most of you or some of you have gone to college or at least looked at college and understand that the administration building is where your program or proposed program is accepted. And at the time, he's actually still Captain Hamilton at the time. Captain Hamilton assisted in gaining the surrender of the Hessian troops under Colonel Johann Rall, but also fired into Nassau Hall, which is the academics building of Princeton, and got to shoot that up after they didn't accept his accelerated program into Princeton because of his age.
I love it. The irony, I love the irony.
Yeah.
The irony of all of it is just honestly, it makes history fun for me because you can find it everywhere.
Yep.
But that's just one of them that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed that you brought that
Yeah,
one.
and now and let me clear Aham's name for a second. He is not firing into Nassau Hall in Princeton because he wants to fire into it. He's firing into it because there's British troops holed up inside of it.
We can go with that.
But this is a classic example of Aham and Marquis de Lafayette and George Washington taking a moment where the colonies are looking at the Continental Army and be like, you guys are a fucking failure. And then they're like, look what I can do. And they go and do this amazing thing. And you're like, holy shit, how did you pull that off?
Yep. Well, and the reason that the Marquis de Lafayette and Hamilton have a great relationship is upon becoming George Washington's aide, he pretty much becomes the interpreter because Hamilton speaks fluent French. Because Hamilton speaks like, I don't even know how many languages, but I think it's like 7. I mean, dude was smart. We said it at the beginning. I can't stress it enough. Dude was too smart.
Autistic,
for his own good. Autistic, if you will. Dude, but we're not psychologists, we're historians.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this ultimately leads to the Battle of Saratoga, or the Saratoga campaign in general. And I know you have some research on Benedict Arnold here, yeah?
Yeah, from my head,
Ish.
yes.
All right. So we're just gonna do this off the dome piece because I think Benedict Arnold's a cool character.
Yeah. So
Benedict
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Benedict Arnold and his wife did it together. It was not just Benedict Arnold. And her role, I would argue, is actually more important than his role.
She was the loyalist.
I think she was the whole reason he did it. This is all.
To,
So this is the speculation portion where I think we're about to have a conversation about. Like, there are no sources. This is just us talking.
yeah. So I will say this. I think Charles Lee and a few other individuals started to jade Benedict Arnold early. Keep in mind, for our listeners, Benedict Arnold was brilliant. He was a brilliant tactician.
Oh yeah,
He
won the Battle of Saratoga.
Yep. And he was a staunch patriot. But there are little things that happen that began to degrade his faith in the colonial independence, right? Well, independence wasn't even really a discussion at the beginning of it. I mean, this man captured Fort Ticonderoga and brought the cannons down to support George Washington in taking Boston. And none of that. Now, Washington recognized him, but and I can't even say nationally because we're not a nation yet. Across the colonies, it was the other individuals that were with him that always got the recognition. It was never Benedict Arnold. What's up?
Or over him, primarily Horatio Gates.
Yeah, Horatio Gates got it 9 times. And Horatio Gates was brilliant. Don't get me wrong.
He was, but half of his accomplishments in the not Civil War, belay that, Revolutionary War, are off the back of Benedict Arnold.
Yes.
And I hate the traitorous dude.
Yep.
Based on principle alone.
You have to have some empathy for what he did for the nation prior to. That man was shot in the same leg like 2 or 3 times.
Look, that dude may be a traitor. No, even if he wasn't shot, I'm telling you how he saved this country. That dude may have been a traitor, but the only reason that France joined the American Revolution was because of the victory that he secured
at Saratoga. Yep.
So that
100%.
dude could have went and kissed King George's ring for all I care, because he got the French to come over and legitimize. I'm not even saying that we needed the French intervention. We did. As much as my pride doesn't want to say we did.
We absolutely did.
But what it did was it legitimized us on the international level. And that's the key reason that we succeeded at becoming a nation. And that's the key reason to something more modern that we could probably correlate to. It's the key reason why the Confederate States did not get legitimacy, is because they lost at Appomattox, Shiloh. Whew.
Yeah.
Whew. Whew.
You're more of a Civil War buff than me, but you're not wrong, right? So Benedict Arnold was actually shot again, and again, this is not a podcast about Benedict Arnold; it's about AHAM. But this is an important.
We're building the world around this.
So Benedict Arnold is shot again for a second time at Saratoga, and while he's on the Palisades, like rushing the enemy at this point, he is just cheering his boys on, throwing his sword in the direction of the enemy, and continues to crawl to win this fight. Gates is not successful without Benedict Arnold. Plain and simple. Gates is not successful without Benedict Arnold.
The revolution isn't successful without Benedict Arnold.
Yep. So now we we get to the point where we've secured a large portion of the North. Benedict Arnold, well, they're not really getting paid. Keep in mind, we are not a federal nation at this point. There is no federal power. We are an alliance of states. Benedict Arnold's not really getting paid real well. The money he's making is off his estate that he already has, things of that nature.
And the honor of a commission isn't the same in the Continental Army as it is in the Royal British Army.
So Benedict Arnold starts to I don't know, skim some shit off the top, send some shit out on trade, do things like that. And he's
Maybe
brought to,
maybe sneak a letter about where he's going next with the boys.
he didn't do that yet. Not in this point yet. He did not do this
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
So he goes to court martial. He's on 6 counts: racketeering, trade, embezzlement, things like that. He is only found guilty of one of them. And that is the using authority to gain trade, I believe, is what he actually gets hit with. I think. I'm not positive on that one. George Washington is elated. He's like, dude, you've won it all. Like, I can put you in front of an army now.
You beat the charges, bro.
Yep. I can put you in front of an army now.
You hazed somebody and got away with it.
Yep. Yeah. Keep pulling at your fucking shirt collar too. So Benedict Arnold turns down a standing ground army and asks to go to West Point, because West Point, and he is exasperated with the Revolutionary War at this point, with it being under Antonio Gates, never gaining any fame, never getting recognition outside of from George Washington for the things that he's done, and the court martial. He is exasperated. He goes
underappreciated.
Yep. He goes to West Point, and with the help of Peggy, his wife, begins communicating with the British, with the Redcoats.
Or north directly, if I do remember correctly.
Yep. And at this point, things are not going well for George Washington.
No.
And in this late fall, he's lost a lot of battles. They've lost a lot of ground.
78, yeah.
Yep. And they've also lost a lot in the South.
A lot in the South.
Now, keep in mind, Alexander Hamilton is with George Washington this whole time. Alexander Hamilton actually meets Benedict Arnold on the morning that we find out that he's a traitor.
And then he meets his wife later.
Yep. So not like that. Not like that.
That was a joke. No, he does meet his wife later, but it's more
she's
of
claiming insanity. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're having breakfast with Benedict Arnold, Alexander Hamilton. Actually, I believe that Marquis is there as well. Yes, he is there, and George Washington is still on his way. He sends Aham and Marquis ahead. Let Benedict know I'm on the way. I can't wait to see him. Like, I miss him.
He's like a son to me.
Yep. They get to the house, Marquis de Lafayette and Alexander Hamilton, and they speak to Benedict, and they're having breakfast. Hopefully not eggs Benedict. It wasn't a thing yet because he hadn't become a traitor yet. And his messenger, another lieutenant, comes up to him and says, sir, I need to speak to you in the other room. So Benedict Arnold steps out of the parlor and into the other room, and his lieutenant shows him a sack from a courier that happens to be a spy that they captured, which happens to be Benedict Arnold's English spy that he trades letters with.
Yeah, buddy.
He quickly,
or better yet, his wife trades letters with.
Yep. So he looks at the letters and he knows immediately what is inside them. He can't do anything about it. He gives the letters back to his lieutenant and says, hey, not a word of this until the general's done. I want to make sure that we're not raising tensions or throwing up a flare before we need to. And he goes upstairs and he talks to Peggy. Tells the boys at the breakfast table, I'm sorry. I'm going to go talk to Peggy. I'll be right back down. He comes back down and says, hey, something came up at West Point. I will be back momentarily. Just sit here, have breakfast, enjoy yourself until General gets here, and then I'll meet you guys back here. He doesn't. He gets on a boat.
Dude goes and gets milk.
Yeah. He gets on a boat, a little rowboat, and he promises the 2 soldiers rowing the boat that he will give them 2 barrels of rum if they row faster. They do row faster. George Washington shows up at the house. Alexander Hamilton and Marquis de Lafayette are like, yeah, he said he's going to be back. He went up to West Point. They wait. They sit there and wait.
Keep in mind, George Washington just came from West Point. because he was supposed to meet Benedict Arnold there that morning, and he
Yep.
didn't show.
Yep. So Washington, Aham, and Marquis de Lafayette, they eventually go up to West Point to inspect it. And they're like, yeah, this is kind of shitty. Like, what are we doing? We haven't done any of the fortifications here. What's going on? So they come back down to Benedict Arnold's house in hopes of finding Benedict Arnold. They don't. He's gone. The lieutenant gives them the letters, and it breaks George's heart. George looked at Benedict Arnold as his son. And what's the quote?
It's something along the lines of this traitorous act will burden me forever, will haunt me forever, something along those lines. I don't have it written down. I'll have to actually go and find it
Yeah.
because it's in a letter somewhere.
Yep. So obviously Peggy pleads temporary insanity, has nothing to do with it. She ends up getting a boat back to her husband because they send a letter. The English send a letter to George while he's there at his house, and she actually admits. Yep.
To tie this into Alexander Hamilton, he is
Yep.
actually a key supporter in getting her the help, the mental help, and getting her away from the scene because he's this big woman's man at the time.
Yep.
Inaccuracy. The Tomcat that's named after him. Even Lin-Manuel Miranda adds a line that says, "That's true." Not true.
Yeah.
Not true at all.
Yeah. So
he goes crazy.
She actually admits Peggy stops by one of her friend's house on the way to the boat to meet up with her husband, and actually lets her know, like, yeah, I pleaded insanity and just fooled Washington, Aham, and Marquis de Lafayette. And now I'm going to my husband.
Yeah, the boys.
Mm-hmm.
The boys of the revolution.
Yep. So that's the Benedict Arnold. And that's not to give us any along Alexander Hamilton's story. That's not to give us any sort of sympathy or empathy for Benedict Arnold, but
traitorous dude.
He is a traitor. The truth behind it is, and nothing will ever recover the fact that he is a fucking traitor. But I hope you understand Benedict Arnold and what he did for the revolution first, and I hope you understand why his choice was made.
But and also to go with that, like it is unprecedented how much people think that this patriotic fervor was just a majority thing.
Yeah,
it wasn't. Like it was pretty much split evenly across the board. You had like 33 to 35% quote unquote revolutionaries, traitors, what have you. And then you had about 30% loyalists who wanted to stay loyal to the crown no matter what. They became spies and they housed the British and they helped the British. And then you had like 30% that just didn't know what was going on. Like they didn't know what to feel because they're just either too uneducated, too poor. It didn't affect them. They're slaves. Like, they're indigenous. That was a big subsect of people that people like tend to forget about during this time, the indigenous population.
Yep.
So like when you hear things like Benedict Arnold's a fucking traitor, yes, he is. He was. However, about 30% of everybody was. So like, I mean, 1 in 3 people was a traitor, sure. In one sense or the other.
Benedict Arnold was disillusioned by Antonio Gates and the Continental Congress during the court martial. He was disillusioned.
Well, hell, how many names did I not get that my squad leader got? How many times does that have to happen on a scale like the Revolutionary War, the War of Independence, something that is literally changing global history, creating the best country that's ever been? How many times has that got to happen to you before you just finally say, fuck this? Like,
yep. So with that being said, I digress a little bit. And the reason I say I digress is because we are here to talk about Aham, and we've got a lot yet to cover.
We're here.
So I want to, as we lead into the next thing, keep in mind that the Continental Army beyond Trenton are getting their fucking ass kicked. We've lost Savannah. They've attacked Wilmington and have not taken Wilmington. They are planning to attack Virginia. they've pretty much taken control of all of Georgia. Georgia's done, right?
Mhm.
So once Savannah was captured, all of Georgia, Nathaniel Greene's down there trying to do everything he can, right? We send Marquette de Lafayette down there to help him. And eventually it comes to a point where we send the entire army down there, the French, the Americans, everybody down to Yorktown. And it's funny. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here because we're about Hamilton. We're not about, this is not a podcast about the Revolutionary War. They begin digging a trench work all the way up to Yorktown, right?
Yes.
And as they get to the final trench work they're gonna do, I did not know this. Matt actually enlightened me on this. It is tradition to like do a little huzzah, right? Everybody fires off one round into the air, do a little
Huzzah!
huzzah. Yeah. Alexander Hamilton takes this a step further. Alexander Hamilton gets out of the trench and has his men get out of the trench and begins a little parade outside of the trench. The English don't fire but what, one cannon?
One cannon.
And it doesn't hit anybody.
Nope.
Doesn't hit anybody. Now, with that being said, in the modern day military, had you gotten out of the trench and done a parade for the enemy, you'd be fucking court-martialed.
No, dude, you'd be fragged. Like,
Yeah.
if you're trying to get me, no, dude. Like,
You're facing all the cannons of Yorktown. Cornwallis is sitting there with 7,000 strong.
scared too, because he's realizing what's happened.
Well, yeah, because they just did it to somebody else not too long ago.
Yep.
Right?
So
old Ben, they did it to him.
yeah.
So
Yeah, no,
he's
scared.
Yep. So I'm gonna leave that off to Matt to talk to us kind of about Redoubt 9 and 10. The only thing I'm gonna do before I pass it back off to Matt is kind of explain to you what a redoubt is. So a redoubt is, think of like a fortified area, either a dirt mounded stone or a wood crafted area to protect troops. There is usually abate is what they call them. They're like sharpened spikes or tree trunks. And there's a breastwork on top of that abate that is basically dirt you've dug from the trench below the redoubt that you mound up, and you make what's called the breastwork. Now, the breastwork makes it hard to climb, allows you to put artillery up higher to fire, but it also allows you to fire down on the enemy that's trying to climb this redoubt to get up to you.
There will be
bloody
pictures.
Mess. Yeah,
I do have pictures of the rebuilt redoubt.
Yeah, and it's simply a bloody mess, right? You have defenders that are shooting down on these individuals, and it almost fast forward us to Pickett's charge and guys saying that they stepped off of the wall there at the cemetery, and they were in like above calf, mid calf deep of blood that's sitting, just sitting, water of blood that's sitting in these trenches. That is what the redoubt is, and now I pass it off to Matt.
Okay, so on the night of October 14th of 1781, Hamilton was given a command, finally, of his own soldiers, and he was told to assault Redoubt number 10 under the French forces, because at this time he's under the overarching command of the Marquis de Lafayette. Hamilton is told to attack Redoubt number 10, while the French forces would attack Redoubt number 9. At the time, Hamilton led a force of about 400 light infantry troops, and his plan was to attack at nighttime because stand 2's not a thing yet, apparently. And the controversial thing, I guess not controversial, but the oddity is he told his men not to load their muskets. He just wanted them to fix bayonets. So why? In my mind, he just wanted to do it quickly, quietly, which he ended up absolutely doing. This dude attacked on October 14th, 1781, and took Redoubt number 10 in less than 10 minutes with just bayonets and close quarters combat.
Yep.
Now, keep in mind, for Redoubt number 10, the British had 18 killed and 50 captured. That's 68 men inside this little, what I would attribute to a PV, a patrol base. The Americans suffered 9 killed, 25 wounded. Not to mention the 400 light troops that he brought along with him. So we're talking about 530-ish people fighting in 15 square feet.
Yep.
15 square meters, sorry. That's not a lot of room. And they're not shooting, they're just stabbing. Like I don't think you understand. This dude decided to be aggressive enough, fast enough, took over this redoubt, captured 50 British soldiers, sent a runner to the Marquis de Lafayette and said, "Hey, yo, dude, you know how we were supposed to do this at the same time? Well, we're done already. You guys need help?" And the Marquis is just like, "What? No, like we don't need help. Like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Yo, we're done. They gave up. We won this redoubt. Do you need help? Like we just waiting on you at this point."
Yeah. So it's
Just-
funny. A couple things to add. One, I want to add that the reason that they did not load their rifles going up to it is because the Continental Army at this point has had almost a terminal fucking issue with misfires and giving up their positions. As a matter of fact, Lexington, the shot heard around the world,
What was
misfire.
ND,
Misfire.
baby. Desk
Yep.
pop.
I have negligently discharged, and now I started the war, right? So he does not load their rifles because he is keenly aware of the fact that we are prone to misfires, and you're going to give us up, right? And if
That's
you give
fair.
us up, if you give us up, we're fucking dead.
Well, and then you have, was that a Bunker Hill? Nathaniel Green, actually, I believe. Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes.
Yep, that did
Yeah,
happen. Yep.
Probably telling his boys, like, yo,
Yep.
keep your fingers straight and off the trigger.
Yeah. So the other amazing part of this that I want to add on is I want to paint a picture for everybody. So Alexander Hamilton is not in the back guiding his troops.
Oh,
Alexander Hamilton is at the vanguard. And as a matter of fact, one of his riflemen take a knee and he runs forward, puts his foot on this soldier's fucking shoulder and launches himself 10 feet in the air above the abate and onto the breastwork to fucking low crawl onto the top of this redoubt to capture this fucking redoubt. He is the first man onto this redoubt.
Good. He's the Hal Moore.
Yep. He's a bad motherfucker.
Yeah, he wanted smoke.
Yeah.
He wanted it.
He wanted all the smoke.
He wanted it.
He called England. He found a way to call England from the top of the hill and said, "I want all the smoke."
Dude, well, no, he did that before when he marched his fucking platoon in front of their cannons.
All right, so sorry. Everybody knows what happens after Yorktown. We end up going. We're not going to get into everybody else's shit because I don't think it's
Cornwallis
important.
capitulates.
Yeah,
It's this whole thing. Great, we won the war. That abrupt.
Yep.
Boom. What do we do? This is where Hamilton shines and starts getting absolutely hated. Absolutely hated. So Hamilton, after Yorktown, he has his fame, right? Like, yeah, he stole the cannons at the beginning of the war, but now he's got he's got the name to him. And he had just gotten married, which we didn't even touch about the courtship yet, but we will. We're going to do it right now.
Go ahead.
So he had just gotten married to Elizabeth Schuyler, who was one of 15 children of Senator at the time, General Schuyler, super prominent political figure, came from money, was a slaveholding family. Controversial point.
Yep.
Guess we'll find out.
Alexander Hamilton, abolitionist.
Or was he an emancipationist? We could argue.
Yep.
I would say he's an abolitionist for sure.
Yeah.
He his mom's wealth was built upon slavery. His now father-in-law's wealth is built upon slavery. He himself never owned slaves, but his wife did.
Yeah.
Can't be a stout emancipationist if that's showing in your home.
Yeah, but abolitionists want it done then and now. It's gone. It's gone. So emancipationists are more slow to the process.
We can get back on this.
Yep.
There's a point here.
Yep. We're digging. We're digging.
I want to argue, but I know better right now because we have a lot to get. We have a lot to get through. So Hamilton is now he's married. He has taken time to think about the future. There's plenty of writings which come from Lawrence, the Marquis, George Washington in particular, where they notice a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He is not staunchly living for being an officer in the military. He is now doing things like a boot would do: show up late, spend more time away, try to take some more leave, just to spend some time with this girl.
Oh fuck.
Oh fuck is right.
Who let the Lance Corporal get married? He bought a goddamn Mustang for 20% interest.
If it wasn't true, it wouldn't be a stereotype.
Yep.
So he is just absolutely enamored by this girl, and he writes to her all the time. And his love letters, the ones that survived, are actually beautiful because he's already a romantic writer. Keep in mind, so his love letters are something special. If you're into that, not saying that I am, but it's definitely cute as hell. So
I think you're into it now.
Dude, I love love. Come on, who can't?
Yeah.
Like, come on. So something that carries over from his marriage to now the political underminings of how to build a new nation is the fact that he's only there because of his connections with people like George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. He really shouldn't be there at all. He shouldn't be in this crowd, which is why eventually, whenever we get into Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and James Madison, and how they're just kind of like above him for some reason that you can't really feel as tangible. It's just that they are born into that crowd. They have a philosophical background to that crowd. They have the money behind themselves to feel comfortable in that crowd. He doesn't feel comfortable in this crowd. He is poor at this time because actually he was poor until he died. He died in an outrageous amount of debt.
Yeah.
Which is so ironic. But he uses his marriage per se with his political affiliation to hoist himself to a new level of government, which is why he gets these invitations to the Constitutional Convention.
Yep.
Why he gets offered eventually the role of Secretary of Treasury under George Washington. But he's ultimately part of the conversation of, okay, now what? He realized that during the war, they struggled so much because they didn't have a strong centralized government to help aid in the military and aid in finance, which are the two core principles of how you maintain law and order and liberty. So he sees this as just this stout, we need a strong centralized federal government, and I'm going to use my marriage and the relationship I have with my father-in-law to hoist myself up with the likes of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Jay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sons of Liberty, all the buzzword names. Okay. And that's when he really gets into writing. Dude goes off on a freaking rager of just writing.
He does.
And and the Federalist Papers is the prime example. And I know that you have some stuff written down about the Federalist Papers, but what the Federalist Papers are is during the Constitutional Convention, Hamilton is pretty much silent for the first 6 days. He's just taking it all in. When it's finally his turn to talk, the dude goes out. What do the kids say? He crashes out.
Yep.
He just goes off the deep end. He starts saying stuff like the ruler should be his excellency and his lordly ordained president George Washington. Like, he gives these crazy monarchical titles while at the same time talking massive shit on monarchs.
Yep.
He calls George Washington his excellency throughout the entirety of the war. That should just speak to how he views George Washington and how he eventually views what he believes the executive branch of government should look like.
Yeah. So I will add that following the war, I mean, Aham remained the pen and coin of Washington, right? It's even speculated that when George Washington finally resigns as president, that Aham wrote his farewell speech, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I have his farewell speech.
Yeah. Washington had already recognized his shortfall as a writer, and would often turn to his cabinet for correspondence and speeches. His farewell speech is in Hamilton's handwriting, but I do believe historians have figured out it was compiled by both men, right? Aham is also the first treasury of the United States of America in 1789, helped found the Bank of New York. Keep in mind, he learned to be an economist in his mercantilist days on St. Croix, right?
Yep, just keeping track of the books.
Yep. And he stabilized a national bank that solidified a national currency. This was an issue during the Revolutionary War because each state was set on remaining the Allied states, which means the US dollar had no backing then. And there was no tax revenue. Federal, there was no tax revenue. And it was next to useless by 1779. The unified states' debt under the federal government, he unified the states' debt under the federal government, and he created the national bank. And also established a U.S. mint and unified the monetary system of the United States of America under a unified coin and solidified currency. Now, keep in mind that George Washington and Aham dealt with at least 3 mutinies because the Continental Congress could not pay them, because these individuals came from the states to join a Continental Army that was not backed by a currency that meant anything at this point. By 1779, the American currency was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Literally, the paper it was printed on was worth more.
Yep. It was like the equivalent to the German Kraut post like 1920.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, they were just burning that to keep warm because it wasn't worth anything.
Yep. So, there's a lot of issues that Aham sees firsthand during the Revolutionary War, and he tries to rectify that as we go into Continental Congress, and he does that kind of with the Federalist Papers. Keep in mind that everybody at this point thought that George Washington was just going to rule. We didn't have terms.
That was the crazy. Well, I mean, it's even crazier than that, because why it threw King George for such a freaking loop is because everyone in the world, George Washington is so beloved today because he did the thing that nobody thought he could do. He turned down absolute power. The man had every right, and we would have accepted it. He could have been king of America. Nobody would have batted a fucking eye. Like, the dude has so much influence in the sphere of the colonial world that what he said went. He had a godlike, like a demagogue kind of structure to him that is so insurmountable that I don't think there's an equivalent that we could put on today. Because keep in mind, this is a dude that I'm talking super passionately about now from 250 years ago. Like this dude embodied what it was to be a servant leader. Again, like Hamilton, but like he said, I will give up this power. And then he did in a time when nobody else fucking did.
Yep.
And nobody else would until 1918. The last fucking War of the Monarchs. Like this dude gave up absolute power, which put us at a very precarious kind of conundrum too, if we're really thinking about it, because we were left super vulnerable to external influence.
Yep.
Like, what if Spanish influence came over and they just like, hey, we want the colonies and we're going to fight you over it. We just got done with the revolution with England. We are not looking pretty. What if France just decided they wanted us, or
Yep.
Spain, Portugal? Like, I mean, that's the kind of thing that he looked at risk assessment and said, no, it is more important to set a precedent. And that's the kind of dude that he is.
Yeah, and that's the thing again. Like we didn't know anything other than monarchs, and since Rome, we had not seen like a democratic republic or anything like that, or anything of that nature, right? This was the time of monarchs,
Honestly,
and
dude, we are just the great experiment. Like we're
Mhm.
called the American experiment for a reason, and it's an ongoing experiment. And
Yep.
it started with this.
And so at this point, dude, AHAM has done great things with the national bank, taking the state's debt, putting us under a unified currency. And now he has to come forward with the Federalist Papers. And this is before George Washington steps out. He has to come forward with the Federalist Papers because the states are still under the assumption that we are 13 allied states that create this commune of individuals in the northern hemisphere.
And by this time we do have the Articles of Confederation, which was signed in 77. So that's like the loosest. If you watch sovereign citizen videos on YouTube, this is what they source. A document from 1777. It is the loosest, most like grasping at straws league of, they call it the League of Friendship, for Christ's sake. Like, I mean, it is like a hearty handshake agreement. That's all we have as a centralized government.
So the states at this point have this very strict fear of like a tyrannical federal government that oversees all the states. The states, hey, we have our states' rights, we'll govern ourselves. You're just there, right? You just exist. Now, the problem with that is what we've seen during the Revolutionary War, where now we can't pay our fucking army and we have 3 fucking mutinies because we have no economic backing to our goddamn dollar at this point, right?
Correct.
And with the Federalist Papers, they basically want to accept a ratification of the Constitution that establishes checks and balances between state and federal power and allows power to the states, but also allows a federal income and allows a federal standing army that is to protect, right? Let's look at John Locke, the 13 Treatises of Government.
That guy.
Government's responsibility is to protect its citizens. If I don't have the tax, if I don't have the ability to do that, then I'm not fulfilling my end of the bargain. And I guess we're breaking up and I'm going to leave your CDs in my truck.
Yep. Which, Thomas Jefferson's a huge supporter of.
Yep.
Not to bring another founding father into this, but he will come up more in a moment.
But I mean, that's my gist on the Federalist Papers. It's just them convincing the rest of the Continental Congress at this point that, okay,
yeah,
dudes,
but they do so much more than that. Like they set a precedent for how a system should. It starts the conversation. Like I've got the Federalist Paper number 78, right? Written by Alexander Hamilton, the other 51. But number 78, it underscores like the judiciary role of American governance, like things that we don't even think about. Like we think of things like the Electoral College or the House of Representatives and the Senate and checks and balances. But this goes over like key fundamental how a court should work, your liberties, your rights. He lays it out there and says, this is how we as a people can achieve this. And that just sparks every controversy that every political everything, I believe, stems from the Federalist Papers.
No, and you're right, and it's beautiful, right? And keep in mind, all of the Federalist Papers are written anonymously by the three individuals that write them.
Yes, at the time.
Yep. Because it is three individuals. However, keeping in mind, Alexander
Most
Hamilton.
of them, most of them were written by him.
Yep. But this is coming from the perspective of an individual that was left alone, high and dry, in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
And understands the necessity to protect the people of the United States of America under some sort of federal government. He's not saying the federal government has all the power. What he's saying is that, hey, guys, if we want to remain us, we have to have some sort of central government, and we have to give it some sort of power. I'm not taking everything away from you, but we have to give it some sort of power. And here is the fucking 6,000 pages details of how we're going to do that.
Yeah. When he spoke at the Constitutional Convention, he talked for like, I think the musical says it's 8 hours. I think he talked for more like closer to 14 hours.
Yep.
It's something like absolutely astronomically ridiculous. Like what we would call like stonewalling today, I feel like is what he was doing, except he meant every fucking word.
Yep.
And he wanted to say it. He wasn't buying time. He just wanted to make sure that everybody heard it.
Who was the other guys for the Federalist? There was two other for the Federalist Papers.
John Jay and James Madison.
Yep. So these guys, and we call them Federalists because, again, they're looking at putting some sort of federal power or federal government into play. So that's why we call them the Federalist Papers. Because the states, or the libertarians, if you will, by themselves did not have the funds nor the power. We've seen what happened with the militias. The militias in every battle during the Revolutionary War fucking collapsed and ran away.
Yeah, just like they would today. You 3%ers. You can't go up a flight of stairs. Like, get over yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Fucking goddamn squeal team 6, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to win this. Like, you need some sort of federal standard of government that's going to hold and protect this country. And that's what, for me, the Federalist Papers aim to do, is to convince the libertarians at this point.
And they didn't necessarily want an almighty federal government like the Democratic Republicans led by, funnily enough, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Because James Madison wrote some of the Federalist Papers, right? Yep. So how do we have this dude
who's playing both sides of the fence?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it gives different perspectives, and why the anonymity of the Federalist Papers is so important is because you think this was just one guy and he's super broad speaking and broad thinking, but it's not. It's three individual, diverse and I want to say multicultural, because they're all from different states. If I'm not mistaken, I may be mistaken about that, but I think there's New York for Hamilton, James Madison was Pennsylvania, and Jay was New Jersey. So these people are from different states entirely, which is the equivalent to different countries.
Keeping in mind, they are all New England states, though. That's the problem.
They are.
Because the most of the people that swore by the state alliances were Southern states.
Yeah, and then we can go down a way deep rabbit hole about Southern honor. Yeah, but you're right. It does make sense that the more we need a strong central government is from the smaller New England states rather than the large plantation class,
Yep.
like Georgia, Virginia
Because
particularly,
keeping in
Maryland.
mind, I believe it's Rhode Island. Rhode Island had already outlawed slavery before we even started the revolution. So there's obvious fears of a federal government at this point, especially for the southern states, because that was their livelihood.
And on top of that, even more is, people are scared that we just overthrew a monarchy and we're about to go right back into one. We can reference Animal Farm, George
Yep.
Orwell's Animal Farm. Like, yeah, they overthrew the humans, and now all of a sudden the pigs are in control and we can't tell them apart from humans.
Yep.
I just wrote a paper on Animal Farm. That's the
Yeah.
only reason I thought about it. So, but the correlation is there. And the importance of the Federalist Papers is still almost insurmountable, because they lay such a wide variety of thought surrounding a strong centralized government. Some of it I agree with, some of it I don't, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And they write so pretty. The thoughts aren't just like, I think strong government good because reasons and feelings. They're just like, the eloquence of a formal government not only bolsters the enamor of our government towards the international depiction of you know what I mean? Like, it's just they make it sound all nice.
Yeah. As our kids would say,
Skibidi Sigma.
yeah, skibbity toilet, you came with that Riz, homie, I'm cooked.
You should hear some of the kids I teach what they say. It's terrible.
So, Federalist Papers go through. They're monumental in the establishment of even what we know as the government today, right? Now, let's talk about why that was concerned getting that passed, right? Who are some of Alexander Hamilton's friends, foes, feuds, things like that?
So I actually have a lot on this. Friends. We can go with George Washington. So after he did quit in 1781, and I say quit is he resigned. It was super peacefully. It was pretty much I don't feel appreciated. I appreciate everything that you have done for me. I understand your reasoning, but I have to go do this. He did eventually get the commission, took readout 10. The rest is history. Haha. Afterwards, they did make a very formal, like, him and George Washington. I'm sorry, a formal, like, apology. They reconnected. They rekindled their friendship. They were actually pretty close. And Hamilton was a very key advisor to George Washington in those initial years as president. You don't think of the Secretary of Treasury holding such a high power, in today's society. You couldn't even tell me who the Secretary of the Treasury is right now. Well,
Nope.
you might. I was like, you might, but like, you're weird. So
Yeah.
like, I couldn't. And that just goes to the point. I feel like I'm a more informed citizen than most. And I don't even know who the Secretary of Treasury is. I'm sure you're about to look it up.
I am.
Because you are me. But the Secretary of the Treasury at the time had the same authority as the Secretary of State.
Incumbent Janet Yellen.
What's she yelling about?
Since 2000, yeah, she's just yelling. Since January 26, 2021.
Oh, I'm only like 3 years behind.
Yeah. I continue.
But at the time, they held a very significant role in the cabinet because the cabinet was only 6 people. Yeah, the Secretary of War, not Defense, War. The Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Navy, I do believe, was in there. There was 2 other minor ones, if you don't mind.
Yep, I'm looking for it.
But also, Washington and Hamilton's relationship was super scratch your back, but also like take no shit.
There was only 4.
Was it 4? Okay.
Yep. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of Treasury, which was Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of War, which was Henry Knox, go figure, his artillery fucking hero. And then Attorney General, which is Edmund Randolph.
Attorney General. Yep. So, yeah, it wouldn't be the Secretary of the Navy because we didn't really have a Navy until Thomas Jefferson was president.
Well, the Marine
But
Corps was
that's
still floating around on ships in 1775, motherfucker.
that's but yeah, but like the Navy.
Yeah,
That's for the Barbary Wars.
yeah.
That's when we officially got on the "Don't touch our boats" train.
Yeah, don't touch our fucking boats.
But the relationship, it was Hamilton and Washington both like they shared a strong belief in like the robustness of a strong central government. They looked at the Louis before the French Revolution. They looked at the King Georges, and every Federalist will outwardly say they hate English customs and courtesies and the British in general, but they mimic them almost at every turn. They only believed at their core being that they just wanted representation. That's it. They just felt like they were Englishmen that didn't get represented. That hasn't really changed. They're just now a new country.
Yep.
So they don't really care if they do it any differently than England per se. Obviously, that's why we have a constitutional convention to see how we're going to do it differently.
Yep.
But George Washington and Alexander Hamilton were both really into the strong federal powers. However, Thomas Jefferson was the ardent leader of the Democratic Republicans, and he did not like the strong federal central government. As a Secretary of State, he really opposed all of that, and he kind of opposed like the industrial economy complex in general, because of Monticello, his tobacco plantation.
Yep.
He was a Southerner. So was George Washington too, by the way, which is even crazier that he was strong.
Virginia. Yep.
Yeah, he was a strong Federalist. Although I wouldn't call George Washington a Federalist per se. I always like to leave him political. Yeah, he is the neutral good of America. So
chaotic good, if you will, if you're playing D&D.
Definitely chaotic good. But we can see this relationship in, I'm going to reference the musical a lot. We can see the relationship in the musical as being like Thomas Jefferson's kind of the villain, dude. Like he kind of takes on the role of the antagonist that kind of pushes Hamilton's buttons. He doesn't really like agree with anything Hamilton says. They're two totally separate people. They have two different mind processes. Like the best way I could understand it is you wouldn't go to Hamilton for advice on government because you wouldn't go to Jefferson for advice on economics.
Yep.
Jefferson was a philosopher. He was a writer. He loved to read. He read in his like all of his free time. He was a very educated man on philosophy and government.
And he consumed humanities
at the cyclic, brother. Like, dude loved everything about that. Hamilton, on the flip side, had all these great ideas, but they were all rooted in English tradition, which is fine. It really is. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's just how he viewed everything. But he also had an economic international outlook on things. He didn't care if the 13 colonies were 13 colonies. He cared about things like international trade and tariffs and credit and what credit could do for our economy and our agriculture and our industry. Like you can't have one without the other. They're both super important, but they clashed on some key events, which is why everyone thinks he's a villain.
He's not a villain.
No,
I would say
not
that
at all.
I would say that Jefferson is he's a better politician in the fact that he has a very personable personality. His attitude towards the humanities, he's politically suave. Whereas
because he never talked. He's a super quiet dude.
Yep. And Hamilton is very much a very sophisticated economist. He's a strategist. He's a great writer, a very passionate romantic writer. but he's also a controversialist. So the moment that you did not agree with Aham, you were in a sights.
Yeah, and it was just game over, and he would 60,000 Harry Potter shit talk you to oblivion.
Yep.
Because he knew he was smart, and that's dangerous because if you know you're smart, you become an asshole with sources.
Yep. I am sometimes an asshole with sources.
Same.
Yep.
But Alexander Hamilton's relationship with Thomas Jefferson was not necessarily what I would consider bad by any means. They did work a lot together to get what we would call backdoor trade deals done, but ultimately it's just politics.
Yep. Yeah.
Like,
Dude, Manuel Miranda. As much as I did love Hamilton, we talked about this last episode. He does kind of exacerbate this relationship. Yes, they're politically on opposite sides of the fence, but they did put those differences aside for America in a lot of situations.
yeah, they work together well. Compromise of 1790 is a huge one, which people will kind of what's the song? Room Where It Happens. You know, Alexander Hamilton really wants a national bank. He believes that if you just assume the state's debts on a federal level, it will increase the credit because we can pay it off because our agriculture is putting out so much that it will allow us to industrialize, therefore getting us to a point where we prove to the world that we can pay back our debts.
Yep, because we had a debt to France.
Correct. Which we actually did pay off.
Yep.
I just want to point out because I like to point that those kinds of things out because it wasn't until like the mid or the early 20th century before America truly had a debt. Which
We started to have a debt. I believe starting around
it was like right after Reconstruction.
Yeah. I want to say Boxer Rebellion.
Yeah, which was the what 1904.
It actually 1896. I think 1896 was the one that we. So there was a Boxer Rebellion before that, but the Boxer Rebellion we fought in was 1896. I want to say.
Well, I just
1899. 1899. November 2nd. I was 3 years old. Fuck! I'm a terrible historian.
U.S. Marine Private Dan Daly single-handedly defended positions on the Tartar Wall, as many as 200 Chinese attackers on 15 July 1900. So we're right at the turn of the century here.
But the Boxer Rebellion, the war when we got into it, started in 1899.
We're not doing Boxer Rebellion. This is just the time frame. America started getting debt around this time. Okay, so we've always paid our debts until this time. But what this compromise of 1790 did is it was kind of the under table deal. Hamilton convinced Thomas Jefferson to convince enough Democratic Republicans to vote yes for a federal bank, and the capital would move from Philadelphia to Virginia in Washington, D.C., what would become Washington, D.C.
Yep.
Which just goes to show, like, that's a big move. And these two dudes obviously had to work together because these are two very big deals. Like not only are you saying that, yes, I will convince at least 13 delegates to vote yes to a federal bank that nobody actually wants in the South because we lose money.
Andrew Jackson.
Yeah. Okay, well we'll get to the American Lion one day.
Yeah.
But not only that, but then moving the capital, which has been Philadelphia since the First Continental Congress of 1774. Like you're fucking with tradition.
You don't fuck with tradition.
You don't fuck with tradition. And he did. And it's been tradition for the last 234 years.
Which is funny that it becomes the District of Columbia, D.C., because King's College becomes Columbia College, which is where Alexander Hamilton graduated from.
Yes. See, we can make connections for everything.
But there's not a real that's not the actual connection there, but I think it is funny.
Um, James Madison, he's another big figure that Hamilton feuded with all the time.
Well,
It
it's
kind of
Thomas
gets.
and Jefferson's little pet.
I think James Madison stands by himself on a lot of different occasions. So he actually really, really didn't like common sense either. Um, no, that's John Adams. I do apologize. Never mind. Sorry, I keep going back to common sense just because I absolutely love Thomas Paine, but James Madison, he really they had kind of a wishy-washy because he was Thomas Jefferson's little pet in a sense, but also he helped write the Federalist Papers. So like what
He
side
did.
is he actually on? Like we don't actually know because it changes on who you ask.
Well, I think that's an infiltration. James
But
Madison's kind of an infiltration for Thomas Jefferson on that.
but he did kind of side more with Jefferson because of Hamilton's financial programs. Like he wasn't necessarily a fan of federal federally assuming state debt. He was a
Mm-hmm.
fan of a stronger centralized government for sure, but he wasn't necessarily like, okay, we can take on the debt because he felt like that would be an overreach of federal right over state right.
Yep.
Ultimately, he would lose money, is what it comes down to. Other than that, they got along pretty great from my research. John Adams, despite both being Federalists, Hamilton and Adams had a very contentious relationship. Um, I don't think Lin Manuel Miranda does a great job at this in the musical, but the amount of shit talking that Hamilton did. Also, I really enjoy how like the most profane thing we continuously say is shit talking because that's all
Yeah.
these people did to each other.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Keeping in mind, this is a young nation trying to like gain its footwork at this point.
yeah.
And everybody had different. Hi, Lily. For those of you watching on video, you now see my daughter hanging on me. But there's a lot of shit talking because we're a young country and we're trying to gain our footwork, right? And a lot of Alexander Hamilton's political enemies would often bring up his birth, his age, that he was foreign. Again, we talked about that early on in the podcast. He's not foreign. He's just as much English as everybody else that's there, right? And that he was a bastard.
Yeah. Like I said, being a bastard at the time, it meant something. Doesn't mean much today, but did then. Where the relationship with John Adams and Alexander Hamilton really kind of comes to fruition here. And now that we're talking about John Adams, I'll bring up Thomas Paine here at the end of this. But John Adams and Hamilton, they were both Federalists. And during the election of 1800, when it was Thomas Jefferson versus like Thomas Pinckney and Aaron Burr, it was kind of this, who are we going to choose? Well, John Adams is like, well, I'm the president, and I think that Thomas Pinckney would be a great, like, here's my endorsement. And what does Hamilton do? He endorses Jefferson.
Yep.
So you have this staunch Federalist. Look at a Federalist, look at his what is perceived public enemy, and say, I want that guy. That's like, we're not going to go into politics. But to put it into a modern perspective, that is the equivalent to Barack Obama coming out and saying, I endorse Trump.
Yep.
Like that's the kind of big deal it would be.
Yep.
And so that's really where the rift with John Adams was. And then Aaron Burr.
Oh God. So
This
Aaron
dude.
Burr and Aham go back and forth on many separate occasions. And I don't want to time jump too far, but we have been going for roughly about
It's 2 hours and 12 minutes on my timer.
So we've been going for quite some time now. So I don't want to jump forward too far, but July 11th, 1804, What leads us to this day? What does Aham do that leads us to this day?
Oh man. So it's a bunch of small things ultimately. But what it ends up going is Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton are two lawyers from New York who relatively kind of get along but don't. And Aaron Burr's also trying, he's vying for the presidency in 1800.
Yep.
He desperately wants to rise above his station. And and at every turn he seems to be, and it's in the musical, it's signified as like Hamilton is the reason that he's overlooked a lot. When in turn, it's just that Aaron Burr was a really good average dude.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't anything particularly special. He was just in the right places at the right times from the right family with the right amount of money. Nothing against him, like educationally or intellectually or politically. It's just that there was nothing in particular. If you didn't hear about it from the musical, you wouldn't know Aaron Burr was a founding father.
Yep.
Um, and I think that just speaks. Well, not only does it speak to the aftermath of the duel, but it speaks to the fact that this dude was really just as unremarkable as they come.
Yeah, and keeping in mind, Hamilton didn't want to duel Aaron Burr, as a matter of fact.
Are we doing the duel?
We
We
are
going
kind
into
of
it?
we're going straight from political. Listen, we have segued from political enemies, straight into the duel.
Cool.
And the only reason I
We
say
can do
that
that.
is because we keep going down rabbit holes, and I want to keep this kind of concise as much as possible. But Hamilton didn't want to duel. As a matter of fact, he had hoped that being the first to shoot into the air would allow him to uphold his moral and religious principles, but accepting the duel maintained his honor as a man, and refusing to apologize for any of his arguments he made towards Aaron Burr that angered Aaron Burr to challenge him to a duel in the first place would kind of solidify him in his political convictions, right?
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, this is after the whole Reynolds pamphlets.
Yep.
Which to hit on that really briefly, uh, political careers were actually like made and broken by scandal at this time. So if you were to have an affair, Bill Clinton, if you were to have an affair at this time, it's social suicide.
Yep.
You wouldn't hold a political office again. You got to keep in mind these are devout Protestants. Like they love the church, they love Jesus and enlightenment, and they're damn near Catholics, so they're like super big on punishment and all that jazz.
Super strict. Super strict.
Just strict. So adultery wasn't really good for a political career, for a lack of better words.
It's frowned upon in this establishment.
It is frowned upon in this establishment. But what the Reynolds pamphlets do in the musical, it kind of shows it as a he's trying to save face for his marriage. In fact, he wrote the Reynolds pamphlets to disenfranchise the claims that he was using federal money to pay off James Reynolds. Because that's what James Reynolds was actually accusing him of, was using his position as Secretary of Treasury to embezzle funds from the federal government and pay him off. So the Reynolds pamphlets wasn't coming clean about an affair. It was saying, this happened. Here are my check stubs. All these checks that I wrote from fucking this lady, like, they were my money. Sorry, boot it. But no federal tax dollars went into my sex life, is what he was trying to
because
say.
he did have an affair.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
No, absolutely he did. And to be completely honest, I think his personal life isn't really too ultimately important in how he himself shaped the nation, because they're almost two separate people.
Yes, they are.
see him as a family man and as a father, like in the middle, right before the war is almost over, and him and Eliza get together and do the whole love thing. And then you see it again once his son Philip dies in the duel, which
Yep.
is very cool that you brought up how he shot his pistol in the air, because his son did as well. Except his son's story is a little bit different. I can't remember who he was dueling. But um, during that duel, Hamilton had given him advice with the same pistols that he ended up dying with, just FYI, that to maintain your honor, you point your pistol to the sky.
George
And
Ecker or Ecker.
George
E-
Eckert. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Because he talked shit on his dad or some shit.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's what it was.
He criticized the Federalist Party.
Yeah. And so when they dueled, Philip and George Eckert, there was actually about a 60-second pause after the pace count, because Philip turned around and pointed the pistol up and just didn't fire. He just held it. Once he fired, that's when George Eckert shot him. So it was a long, like 60-second ish, like what's going to happen. And I think that's why it hit Alexander Hamilton so harshly, is because like he saw his son do the right thing, the honorable thing, and then he saw his son die for it. And I think that just kind of changed who he was as a person.
Yep.
And that's why the politician and the man, the husband, the father, kind of just split for me. So I don't think his affair had anything to do with his political leanings or the shaping of this country or anything of the like. I just think it's just hot gossip on top of everything else that this dude had going on.
Yeah, is everybody vying for some sort of political power at this point? Now, granted, I don't agree. I'm like a staunch like in union loyalist within that union. So I don't agree with his personal life at that point. That's the one part where I disagree with Hamilton on is his affair, right?
Oh, yeah.
I agree with you that I don't think it had any play in his politics, and he was always an honorable man as far as the Secretary of Treasury, things like that. But we move into this duel with Aaron Burr, and he's keeping everything intact. Aaron Burr is not Alexander Hamilton.
No.
Aaron Burr is somebody who is trying to elevate himself for his own selfish means. Whereas there may have been some self-thought in Alexander Hamilton's elevation, but everything that he did for the most part was for the nation.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
So we go to this day in 1804. Keep in mind, this is 3 years after his son died at the age of 19, Philip.
Yep. With the same pistols, by the way.
And Alexander Hamilton shoots his pistol into the air. Aaron Burr shoots him into the abdomen, mortally wounding him. And eventually,
funnily enough, I did read in a couple sources that it was between the 4th and 5th intercostal space, CLS Marines and Gorman.
Yep, there you go. Is that a sucking chest wound?
It's a sucking chest wound. It's where you
Yep.
put your needle D in.
Yep.
Or your
So-
second and third interclavicular, but that's semantics.
Yep. So Hamilton dies on that day. And really, as far as America, if it were not for Manuel Miranda, really, if we're being honest, this founding father and everything that he did probably would not have been elevated to the point where it's at nowadays in the current society.
And I would have to say Ron Chernow. His biography on Hamilton is actually, he's got a couple, but on Hamilton, I cannot recommend that book enough. I just finished it. The super easy read historically, compared to the stuff that we're used to reading.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable. It reads like a novel. I would recommend anybody out there go read it.
Which, for those of you that don't know, and I think we may have touched on it earlier, but Lin-Manuel Miranda actually had Ron Chernow on his staff for the playwright of Hamilton.
I think that's actually really cool too.
Yeah.
But before we
And
go too deep into the musical, actually go
yeah.
ahead and finish your thought.
Well, no, I was just gonna lean into you right now for like the legacy of Aaron Burr after he kills Alexander Hamilton.
Mm, mm, that's a story. Okay, so the duel. It happens. What does Burr do? Well, now he's wanted for murder in New Jersey and New York because dueling is illegal there and has been for some time, right? So he goes down to South Carolina. And eventually goes down to Washington D.C. because what people kind of forget in 1804, um, because he was second place in the election of 1800, he was the de facto vice president until 1805. So this dude is wanted for murder in 2 states as the vice president on the run through multiple different states. Goes to DC, non extraditable, finishes out his term. After that, he finally got the charges dropped, but he could politically never recover, like ever. And so, because Hamilton was such a high political figure, even though this was off the back of the Reynolds pamphlets, it didn't matter because the legacy of Hamilton was so profound at the time. Um, he never received another position of influence ever again. Lost the trust of many former allies and pretty much effectively like incinerated his ambitions for a higher office, being the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
In 1807, allegedly, I believe this story 100%, but allegedly, he was part of a conspiracy theory to overthrow the American government. Burr was implicated in a mysterious. I'm going to read this verbatim because we're a couple hours in and we have been drinking. In one of the most infamous episodes of his life, Burr was implicated in a mysterious scheme later known as the Burr Conspiracy. Burr allegedly plotted to create an independent nation in the Western Territories, including parts of Louisiana, as part of the Louisiana Purchase, and Mexico, and pursue the seizure and control of thereof those states and territories which they occupy. He was then arrested and tried for treason in 1807, with a trial presiding over by Chief Justice John Marshall, who's a big deal. Burr was ultimately acquitted due to the lack of concrete evidence, but his reputation was so much further damaged. And reputation meant everything in the colonial times / early American history. When Thomas Paine, man, I hate that I'm referencing him so much. When Thomas Paine came over from London, before he came over here, he had he had gone and talked to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin gave him a letter of recommendation, which was almost unheard of because the 19th century, or sorry, the 18th century was the age of the con man, right? You could be anybody from Adam and nobody would know who you were. But the fact that you have a prominent American figurehead, i.e., Benjamin Franklin, saying, hey, this is Thomas Paine. You should get to know him a little bit. I think it'd be worth your while. Your reputation was everything. So when Aaron Burr killed Hamilton, ruined his reputation, and set himself on the path of an apparent conspiracy theory, it damaged his reputation to the point where he could not stay in this country. He was acquitted, like I said, but after his acquittal, like Burr spent several years. I do believe it was 1808 to like 1812, in England and France, and he tried to get like some financial backing to go back to America and purchase land, i.e., people were believing that he was trying to go be able to purchase a large portion of parts of the Louisiana Purchase in order to continue on his conspiracy theory or his coup, so to speak. So he spent 4 years in Europe before he finally came back at the end of 1812. He resumed practicing law in New York because Burr and Hamilton were rival lawyers at the time. And despite his infamous reputation, he kind of just lived super quietly back in New York. Everyone kind of forgot about him or stopped giving a shit because let's be real, people at the time kind of dealt with today.
Yep.
Because they didn't have the niceties of a modern shower or planning or, healthcare or like food. Like you lived kind of day to day in the broad sense. His later years were marked by personal tragedies. This one's actually kind of sad to me, because he had just gotten back from England in 1812, and the year after, his daughter Theodosia, his only legitimate child, was lost at sea.
Yep.
So he had just gotten back from a self-imposed but kind of imposed exile out of America, finally rekindles that relationship with his daughter that he lost for those years because they could only write letters. And then he loses her at sea. Super tragedy. Um, and like I said earlier, if we didn't have the musical, I don't think anyone would know who Aaron Burr was.
No, it's kind of a lost part of history, really.
Yeah, and he played such a, I don't even want to say he played a vital role. He was just the catalyst of a lot of decisions made by very important people. He himself was not necessarily important. He was just influencing important people.
Yeah, and it's funny because even, you talk about how tragic the death of his daughter is. He lives for another 24 years.
Long time.
Yep,
He
before he
dies in
dies.
36.
Yep, 1836, September
Dude
4th.
almost makes it to the Civil War.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, he survives the Jacksonian era for the most part.
yeah, I mean, motherfucker died when he was 80, in a time
Yep.
when the life expectancy was like what, 52 or something like that.
Which is
Like it
which
was
is
young.
funny because we're gonna dive into a lot of that earlier than these individuals in the Salem witch trials on the next episode. Which is funny because when you look at a lot of the victims from that, you're like, holy fuck, they were how old?
Yeah. Yeah, just nuts.
Right. And then you go into the legacy of Hamilton. And I'll be honest with you, and I stand by this. Without the musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda, I don't know that Hamilton's legacy is impacts our generation as much as it did. Right. I think, and Ron Chernow as well, really kind of sparked this insight into who Hamilton is, right? Hamilton allowed himself very little leisure in his government endeavors and in his national endeavors. He was dedicated to his work, the American economy, and he did that because as a youngster, he absorbed all these lessons on bookkeeping, money, credit, scheduling, inventory control, short-term finance, and the pricings of good and sale, right? All of which are extremely admirable for a Secretary of Treasury of the United States of America is the first one. You know what I mean? But I do think that Lin-Manuel Miranda really kind of romanticizes. And I have not read Ron Chernow's book yet, but I would guess that he romanticizes Alexander Hamilton a lot too.
Of course.
And he is a great dude, right? When you look into it, he is a great dude. And I would argue that he is significantly better than Aaron Burr.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. And it kind of comes down to this because of the duel, right? It comes down to that argument between those two because of the duel.
Which is everything that Burr is known for.
Yep.
If he's known at all. Yeah,
Yep.
unfortunate to say, but like he's either not known or he's known for killing Hamilton, which is terrible because I am of the opinion that they were actually just acquaintances. I don't think they were enemies. I don't even think they were. I don't even think I would consider them political rivals. But they didn't really disagree on a lot. They just kind of took jabs at each other's like most radical points. But ultimately, they agreed on 98% of what they believed in.
Yeah. Look at how volatile politics are today, right? And
Oh yeah,
I despise politics, right? But look at how volatile politics are today. And look at how tempered they were back then. But it led to a duel that takes Alexander Hamilton's life. And outside of that, his legacy is first Secretary of the Treasury and the $10 bill.
there's a fun one in there.
Go ahead.
Coasties. Alexander Hamilton started the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So if you didn't know, our coasts are guarded
They
by
are.
some coasties.
And some
And
puddle
honestly,
pirates.
I've never met what do we call them, Coast Guardsman. I've never met somebody in the Coast Guard that I didn't love immediately.
I call them
Like,
puddle pirates.
of course you do.
I love the Coast Guard. I'm fucking around, dude.
I love the Coast Guard too. Honestly, I prefer the Coast Guard over the Navy, except my corpsman and my
easy. Be easy on our squids, all right?
I said except my corpsman. The
Listen,
CVs
don't
are
fuck with the
cool.
boats. Don't fuck with the boats.
Okay, the boats are different. I'm not talking about the boats. I'm just saying I've seen enough rusty 50 cals on a Navy ship to make me fucking sick to my stomach. Okay,
That's because you're a fucking machine gunner. All right. Now, with that being said,
it should bother everybody.
and we'll close this out outside of our bullshitting. We'll close this out with actual Aham versus Miranda. And the one thing that I've seen throughout all of this, and this goes into like, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to this podcast, me and Matt dig through several primary sources.
Oh yeah,
we read the Old English so you don't have to, right? And it's very painful to get through. With Chernow and Lin-Manuel Miranda and their musical, the love between Angelica Schuyler and Alexander is strictly speculation, right? I know in the musical they make it this big thing, but Angelica was already married for like 11 or 12 years.
yeah, it's like 11
Yeah, before she met Alexander Hamilton.
to a man named John Baker Church, who was a very wealthy London businessman.
Yep, and with that being said, Alexander Hamilton was a very romantic writer when he wrote, right? So there's a lot of emotion that comes out in his writing that could be nowadays, for somebody who's looking over primary documents, misconstrued as something more than what it was. It really
keep in mind, this is the same guy who's writing to, his sister-in-law as the guy who a historian thinks is writing to his like gay lover, John Lawrence.
Yep.
Like this dude writes romantically.
Yep. And Marquis de Lafayette, right? They speculate that as well.
They do.
And not that there's anything wrong with Alexander Hamilton.
We're not here debating right or wrong. We're just here debating the speculation.
100%. Not that there's anything wrong with if he was gay. However, what I would tell you is that's just how he writes, right? That's the reason that Hugh Knox. That's the reason that Hugh Knox got him a scholarship and raised the money to get him up to Boston to go to fucking Princeton, right? It's how he writes. And
most of Washington's field commands are in Hamilton's writing. So even Washington's work, quote unquote, is romantic because of Hamilton.
Yep. And that goes to show you that searching through primary sources, you can often speculate or find things that are not necessarily true, right? And I think that reads the same in the correspondence between Angelica Schuyler and Alexander Hamilton in this case. The other thing that's not true between Alexander Hamilton and Miranda is that hip hop did not exist yet, right? There was no hip hop.
Oh, gee, really?
Yeah. There was no hip hop yet.
The cabinet battles didn't go exactly like that.
Yeah, we had not done the 8 Mile yet, Eminem, and for my big fans out there, Wu-Tang Clan wasn't around yet. You know what I'm saying?
But his real name's Clarence.
Wu-Tang's for the kids, homie. All right. And like I said, Miranda actually put Ron Chernow, a Hamilton historian, on a staff to create the musical, and the musical was really was done really well. And for just for 1 second,
I agree.
just to prove that Wu-Tang's for the kids. Evelyn, Evelyn, come here, real quick. Hey, in the camera, what's for the kids?
Wu-Tang!
Show me. Wu-Tang's for the kids. See? Think I'm fucking around.
Oh.
Come on, baby.
Yup.
That doesn't get edited out, by the way.
No, the video is pretty much going to go up unedited. The audio is going to be edited, but the video, I'm just gonna send it.
Yeah, we're a little long on audio, but I think a long podcast as our second podcast is not a bad idea.
No, but I mean, it's over the revolution. It's good.
I think it's great. I think it's fantastic.
Right.
So what was your difference between Hamilton and Miranda?
So I think primarily, other than the Angelica thing, it boisters relationships more than anything. George Washington, like I said, Hamilton and Washington, they were at each other's throats a lot. They respected the hell out of each other. However, when two alpha dog male personalities who like military glory and want victory and want all that jazz, when they're together in the same room, shit gets toxic. So they feuded quite a bit. The feud with Aaron Burr is over exaggerated, even though Aaron Burr ultimately was the one that killed him. Like, they really didn't have any interaction outside of their political disagreements. Like, they weren't friends, they weren't partners at a law firm. They really didn't see each other or interact with each other. It was kind of just coincidence.
Yep.
Those kinds of things. And then, Hamilton's stance on slavery, the musical, obviously he's this super big abolitionist who just or emancipationist who just wants it done right now. But in fact, he was an abolitionist, like you said earlier. I know I played devil's advocate, but it's just kind of what I do. But he was an abolitionist. His family owned slaves, his wife owned slaves, his father-in-law owned slaves, his mom owned slaves. Slavery wasn't his favorite thing by any means, but he also understood that if he took a very devout stance as an emancipationist, his political career would be over before it even started, and he was still trying to make a name for himself as it was.
Yep.
Which is why he married into the Schuyler family, amongst some other reasons. I would like to assume love is one of them.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, because you bring up the abolitionists, that Thomas Jefferson actually wrote in an article in for the Second Continental Congress for the Constitution that actually abolished slavery, and it took 5 more days because they made him write that out.
Which is even kind of funnier, because Jefferson in slavery is such an odd. It is such an odd topic.
Yes.
I do believe it is about 10% of the black population of America can trace their lineage back to Thomas Jefferson.
100%. 100%.
Which is absolutely wild, despicable, abhorrent. I'm trying to think of other adjectives that can describe it. Yeah,
disgusting.
Like, just absolutely just disingenuous.
Keep in mind, we're historians, right? Don't go outside of the time. We're in a time frame right now, so don't go outside the time.
Don't go outside the time. But he also was okay with, like, yeah, we could free him. He was one of the biggest supporters of the international slave trade becoming illegal in 1808. He's the one that wrote that into our Constitution.
Yep.
Nobody seems to appreciate that. So this dude's stance on slavery is just so weird, and I would honestly, he would be one of the people, Thomas Jefferson, fuck Hamilton too, probably, um, to just sit down at a meal and just pick their brain. Like, how
Where's your
can
head
you,
at, dude?
dude? Like, I just got to know how you validate yourself. Like, if you just say like, "Oh, well, I faked this," that's fine. I just want to know how you do it
Yep.
because how can you give 10% of the African American or any sort of population for that matter, and then be against the institution with which you use to gain all of your ambitions.
Yep. 100%.
I want to
I
know
think,
where his mind's at.
and again, looking back now, especially for those of us who served in the Marine Corps, surrounded by our Black American brothers, things like that, and sisters, we have a certain passion for them, right? And you raise a certain amount of violence in their defense, if you will. Um, but it's a very different political spectrum. It's a very different environment and climate back then, and
Yeah,
that's
much so.
why it's important as historians to look at it and really kind of put your mind in the mindset of the individuals back then, because you have to look at the social and cultural climate of the situation back then. Again, making most of your money off of the slave trade and the plantations at that time, it is very quizzical to be like, okay, wait, you're an abolitionist? How did this happen? Right. But I think
Yeah.
I think we've covered Alexander Hamilton, and I think we've done it fairly well. Obviously, this is a glass of
I think
history.
yeah, so I mean we
Yeah.
went off on some tangents.
Yep.
I had a feeling we would. I've accepted it.
Yep.
That's
And
kind of why I was okay with just going out.
And so, with that being said, as we close this episode, I want to take a few moments to talk about your and I's next project, which is happening within the next week,
Yep.
that we plan on releasing somewhere around the time frame of Halloween, specifically because it's a Halloween special. But we are going to cover the Salem witch trials. We've kind of hinted at it on Facebook, but
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
yeah, me and Matt have about, and Sammy, as a matter of fact. Sammy helped on this one, and we want to have her as a guest, but I don't know if we can make my semen demon stay away long enough for us to do a full episode. Um, but we are going to do a Halloween special on the Salem witch trials. We have 13 pages of collected primary and secondary sources.
And growing.
Yep, and
And pages and growing.
it continues to grow. So the Halloween special is probably going to be a little bit longer, but it's going to be very concise because we're only covering a year and 4 months really. So I look forward to talking to you all about that one. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Yes, we did go off on some tangents, but I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as the last one, and I hope you learned something. That's really the big thing.